Thank you for attending our event. The Toronto AES unites engineers socially. Within our allied arts, we collate, collect, and disseminate scientific knowledge that furthers all fields of audio engineering. The AES aims to empower people of all ages through participation in a healthy, safe, open community presentation. Learn audio engineering through events, presentations, networking, and mentorship. For more information, go to torontoaes.org. There you'll find over 30 years of meetings, events, Masters of Audio, members showcases, and much more. Our sponsors are the Solotech, Gear Audio, Sonotechnique, Bell Media, YSL Pro, Electrosonics Canada, BRTB, Global USS, Adamson, Lawo, avshop.ca, and Q5X. Give the gift of membership. Go to aes.org/join to join today. For more information on the Toronto Audio Engineering Society, go to torontoaes.org. There you will find notifications on our upcoming events, past events, Masters of Audio, and our member showcase. The Toronto AES is brought to you by Solotech, Gear Audio, Sonotechnique, Bell Media, YSL Pro, Electrosonics Canada, BRTB, Global USS, Adamson, Lawo, avshop.ca, Q5X, and the executive team of the Toronto Audio Engineering Society.
All right.
Hello, so now we're moving on with Ron Sarles. Ron is a Juno-nominated engineer who has worked both with music and post. Ron has been working for the CBC for several years, and he used to be one of the main engineers at the classic Manta. He engineered there for 14 years. So now we're on with the first question that I have for Ron, which is, what does your studio setup consist on? If you could just summarize, like, what gear you're using and how you're using it. Yeah.
Well, starting with the computer, it's a Mac Pro 12-core trash can series with 64 gigs of RAM. Then for my interfaces, I have a bunch of Metric Halo LIO8s and loaded up with mic preamps as well. So inside the studio, I use 2 of those so that I have a total of 16 outputs. They drive a bunch of different monitor speakers. I've got Avant tones for small reference monitors. I've got a pair of Adam A7Xs for like a home stereo reference, and then I have a bunch of ATCs that I use for my main larger system. Across the front, I've got a stereo pair of ATC 50s, SEM 50s. For left and right, I use an ATC 45 for the center because I wanted to have something that was symmetrical and sitting right in front of me and up above my my monitor. So it handles the center with a little bit of EQ to match it to the left and rights. And then my main surrounds are SEM 20s driven with a pair of Bryston 7Bs. And then for my overheads, I've got ATC 12s, which are driven with Bryston 3Bs. And I'm waiting for a pair of ATC 12s for my rear surrounds that are on back order right now. And they'll be driven with a Bryston 4B that I have sitting in my rack waiting for them. So in the meantime, for my rear surrounds, I'm just using a pair of self-powered Adam A5Xs. So those are going to be replaced as soon as possible. But it's a great sounding system, and it's a really good sounding room. The room is built in what was my old garage. It was completely blown out and gutted.
Wow.
And I had contractors come in, and we built it all with tons of rock wool insulation and acoustic rock drywall on resilient channels, so it's all kind of separated from the outside. It's not 100% soundproof, but it's plenty good enough for mixing in. And then I have prime acoustic panels on the walls for sound absorption, and also a couple of prime acoustic panels up on the ceiling for stopping the reflections from coming down at me too much. So to me, it sounds very natural in here, and it gives me good separation for imaging and that kind of stuff, and it works well with the immersive setup.
That's great. That's a wide variety of speakers that you have there.
It is. The ones that get used at the same time are all from the same family. They're all ATC, and ATC does a really good job of making sure that they all match pretty well in terms of their acoustic footprints. So to me, it sounds killer in 7.1+4. So
that's awesome, and I would never imagine that that's your garage there, like ever.
Yeah, well, and when we put the system in, if you like, I can take my camera and just sort of move it around to show you. It's full cathedral ceiling in here. You can see the height monitors at the rear with my SEM20s for my surrounds. And then if I turn this down to the front, you've got the so ATC 50 and the 45 in the center, and another 50 on the other side. And then the A7X is just my stereo monitors. And then I have a large screen for if I'm doing TV work. That's where the TV plays. But it's also great for plugins and stuff for mixing.
Sweet.
And it's all like all my computer stuff is on a simple, uplift desk from IKEA. So I can adjust the height, and the main reason for that was so that I could drop it down low enough that it's not blocking my center speaker if I'm working in 5.1 or immersive audio.
So great. So how did your story with Atmos start? How did it all get started? How did you become interested in it?
Well, it was kind of a logical progression. I started doing surround mixing back with doing film scores for IMAX. I guess one of the first big surround things I worked on was the score for the IMAX film Blue Planet, which was the astronauts shooting Earth from up above and then talking about how their view from up there tied in with down here. So that was nice. It was a big 60-piece orchestra with a lot of percussion overdubs and stuff and so on. And I was working on that one with Mickey Irby and Maribeth Solomon wrote the music for that, and Paul Massey, who is a world-renowned, multiple award-winning mixer. He was the main mixer on the score for that. When we started it, he got us going on it, and then I took over after the first day of recording. I took over for the rest of the recording, and then he and I worked side by side on the mixing initially, and then I did some additional stuff after that. But that was my real introduction into immersive audio and mixing. That, of course, was, I think it was a 6-channel surround for the IMAX theaters in those days with an integrated subwoofer. And then when I started working at CBC, I began doing film scores. And I think one of the first 5.1 scores that I did at CBC was with Michael Dana for The Sweet Hereafter.
Wow.
And from there on, we just did a whole pile of them with Michael and with Andrew Lockington, who had been Michael's assistant composer and then became a composer in his own right. And so, we worked on a whole bunch of different film scores and things. And since then, Leslie Barber and Paul Linson, people like that, Ian Thomas, did scores with all those guys. And that was all in 5.1. But I was always interested in the idea of full immersive audio. And I started following a lot of the stuff that Morten Lindberg was doing with his L2 productions in Norway, I think he's out of, and also Daniel Shore, who was doing it with Sonaluminous in the States. And in 2017, I went to the New York AES that October and just filled myself full of as much information as I could about immersive mixing, and I got to meet both Daniel Shore and Morten Lindberg and sit down and chat with them for a while and talk about mixing immersive. And in those days, they were mainly mixing in Oro 3D, which is more of a European standard for music mixing, although these are for film in Europe as well. But they were doing stuff that was being recorded for Oro 3D and also released in Dolby Atmos. And then I saw a number of Atmos presentations. And that was the year that the ATSC 3 standard, they standardized on Dolby Atmos for the North American market and a few other markets, but also MP3 for some of the, European and Japanese markets, but all basically the same kind of channel configuration, which was 7.1.4 audio. So you've got your 4 overheads and 7.1 for your kind of bass level. So that made sure that everything that was being mixed for broadcast in Immersive would be compatible formats around the world. And the hope was that once they standardized that, it would be mandated that all broadcasters would have to conform to that. That didn't get pushed through. It was decided to make it optional. So it didn't take off in 2017 the way we kind of expected that it would. But what's happened since then, of course, is Tidal Music, Amazon Music, Netflix have all gotten on board with 7.1.4 for broadcast and music. And then just earlier this year, Apple Music also climbed on board for 7.1.4 Atmos music. And then that just blew everything wide open. So everybody's building Atmos rooms now and singing Atmos for music releases, which is fantastic, because I really think that the stuff is done as a dedicated Atmos mix and then also released in immersive audio for headphones. It really can have a much better impact than just doing a dedicated stereo mix only. And so that's what excites me.
Interesting. So you have a pretty long history with immersive, I guess.
I've been interested in more than one speaker for a very long time. I've always found mono to be horribly disappointing, even if it's a Beatles mix. To me, it's like I'd much rather hear the stereo. And going beyond stereo, like if you get used to working in 5.1, it's really hard to go back down to just stereo. And once you've had a chance to listen in 7.1.4, it's disappointing to go back down to just 5.1. So I think every step of the way, if it's done properly, it can be fantastic. And so that's what motivates me.
Great. So now I've got another question for you, and that is, what do you find are the challenges and advantages of working with immersive content compared to like stereo?
Well, the challenges are just the complexity. It's hugely complex in its routing, and to get it to fold down correctly and so on is a tremendous amount of extra work, and much more challenging than just folding down a 5.1 to stereo, which is pretty standardized, and we all kind of know what to look out for there. But in immersive mixing, to get the stereo and the binaural mixes to work as well as the full discrete, multiple speakers, takes a lot of time and a lot of extra planning and effort. Also, just setting up a template for a music mix, and to me, mixing music is a lot less complex than mixing post, where you have, for music, you can often get away with just having a single music bed and a whole bunch of objects. Even that can be a fairly challenging setup to get everything to play the way you want it to, and you've got to be thinking about your binaural fold down and whether you want stuff to be, near, far, or medium in its distance in the sound field, and that's all a choice that you have to make as part of your mixing fold down. So there are many, many layers that you have to go through to check things to make sure that it all works. Much more than just mixing in stereo or even 5.1. Once you get over those challenges, then the amount of creativity it allows you is huge. So to me, it's worth that extra time that it takes to set that up. But I would never say to somebody, "Oh yeah, I can just send me some tracks I can slough off and mix in a couple of minutes." Like you could throw faders up for a stereo mix and get something that sounds pretty good in a space of a few minutes. Yeah. To get to that same sort of initial level of like a monitor mix in an immersive, it's a big setup that takes a long time. And there are things you can do in a template to speed that process up, but it's still many more things to check than you would have in a simple stereo mix. So yeah, it takes a lot more time and
Yeah, for sure. So what are your thoughts about like Apple Music having spatial audio now? Like I know you've been a big Tidal supporter, and but what are your thoughts? Do you think that the fact that Apple is simplifying this by even rebranding it, as in calling it spatial audio instead of Dolby Atmos, do you think that it's going to grow? That there's going to be more interest in music mixed for Atmos because of it?
Well, I think there already is a lot more interest. I mean, I've seen it amongst my colleagues. A lot of people talking about expanding to Atmos mixing, adding a bunch of extra speakers and interface channels and all that kind of stuff. So from a professional standpoint, definitely it's created a lot of interest. It'll be interesting to see how the public embraces it. Pretty hard if you've got to spend $750 on a pair of headphones to hear it properly. But the new AirPod Pros are half that price. And I was just reading a comment on Facebook today from a colleague who just bought his first pair.
Yeah.
He's blown away by them. So I think the general consumer will hear the same thing that the pros hear. Like, if they work, they work.
Yeah.
And people will notice.
Yeah. So my next question is, can you talk about some projects that you've worked in Atmos so that people can search and listen to them and check them out?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've got a couple of things that I've thrown out there just for a laugh. So if they search my name, a couple of things might come up on Tidal or Apple Music. Take them with a grain of salt. I did an acoustic guitar piece, which was, kind of fun, and it took me all of about a day to do it. But I did a piece just as a test thing a long time ago, and mixed it in Immersive, and then rendered it into Dolby Atmos about a year ago, just a spoof on Pachelbel's canon. So please don't think it's meant to be serious music. It was just an experiment and kind of a, don't take it too seriously. But on a more serious note, I've done a bit of mixing now with a colleague of mine, Mike Harriott, who is a phenomenal brass player, composer, arranger, killer acoustic bass player, like jazz bass player, and a great keyboard player. And he is married to Offer Harnoy, the famous Canadian cellist. So I've been working on stuff with the two of them. He presented me with a couple of pieces to mix in Atmos that he released through Avid Play on his account. And I can play you and show you a little bit of that if you like. One of the pieces that I worked on, where he has played everything on the track except for the drums. He hired a drummer for that, but to me it's the perfect thing to dive into Atmos mixing with, because it's like a full brass choir. And I've always, when I think of immersive audio, I think of the experiments that Gabrielli did back at St. Mark's in Venice, in the cathedral there, where he had brass choir at the front of the church, but also antiphonal brass on the balcony behind. And so that was kind of the thought that I had when I mixed this, where it starts with a very simple kind of jazz brass chorale in the front, and then as the other parts come in, they wrap around you in the surrounds and in the surround overhead. So you get that feeling of the balcony brass behind you, along with a full rhythm section, which is in the bed. So if I can I'll share my screen with you if I can. See if I can figure out how to do this again. Here is my Atmos renderer screen. Hopefully that comes through. And I'll just play a little bit. You can watch on this window here. You'll see where the objects come up. Now, this doesn't have a ton of objects because it's not a huge brass section. There's only one track per part. But keep in mind, these parts were all, except for the drums, all played by one guy into one microphone. I'll play it from the top here. Okay. Here it is.
Cool. Cool.
Then here comes the rest of the brass. Anyway, that gives you an idea of just, sort of basic panning and stuff in this. The reverb is, I'm using Symphony 3D. And so to get the overhead channels in Symphony 3D, you have to pick them off and send them to an object that is locked to each of the corners. And that shows up in your routing. Actually, maybe I can just show you that as well. If I can figure out how to
Yeah, I'd love to check it out. So it's basically like you choose like the object number as the one that the object numbers.
Yeah, what happens is you put the Symphony on a 7.1.2 aux, and it's actually is it a 7.1.2? Yeah, it goes on a 7.1 bed, and then you route it to 7.1.2. But you don't send anything to the overheads, and the overheads, let me get my screen sharing. I'm going to stop that share, and I'll just share a different screen with you here. So if I share my you should have my Pro Tools screen now.
Yeah, it's there.
Okay. So here's the reverb bed, and it's the Symphony 3D, this plugin here. But for the routing for the top, when you select the input, like what you do is you create a couple of additional stereo auxes that I have grouped together with the bed aux. And when you're selecting the inputs, for the input, it actually comes up as a plugin that's available, and you can select top front or top rear. So for the one stereo aux, I select top front, and it's routed to objects 11 and 12. And then for the rear, I select from plugins top rear, and then that is routed to objects 13 and 14, so that they stay locked in the objects when I'm playing it, and they play out those top corners. So you get this nice discrete decorrelated reverb that is actually full 4-channel reverb in the top. And the nice thing about that is that because it's decorrelated, when you fold it down into stereo, it doesn't wind up being this mono glomp in the middle.
Yeah.
It stays full stereo. And that kind of stuff is super important to think about, because I'll stop sharing that now. If you don't make sure that the stuff going to the corners or to the overhead is decorrelated, it just folds down into a big mono mass in the center, and you don't want that. It's just not a desirable effect. So those are the kinds of things that you think about in the same way that we think about it in 5.1 audio. I never send anything to the surrounds that is just a straight pan back from the front. It has to be decorrelated, or it's going to be a mess when it folds down into stereo, because a lot of stereo systems don't read LORO properly. They automatically turn it into a Dolby Pro Logic fold down, which means when it folds into stereo for somebody's home system, it'll be ganging up on one side and subtracting on the other side, and your stereo imaging goes out of whack. It gets loud on one side and quiet on the other. So this kind of correlation and decorrelation becomes like super important when you're thinking about how it's going to fold down. Just pulling stuff back from the front and then hoping that that's going to work isn't necessarily the best thing. And so I'm often thinking more in terms of like discrete hard panning, if it's front to back or left to right, just because of the way it's going to fold down into the stereo. But I mean, you'll hear that stuff right away when you monitor on headphones. And one of the nice things about the Atmos renderer, and I'll just share that screen again. And I don't know if you've talked to the other guys about this, but use my screen sharing here. Screen. So on the renderer here, you've got all of your physical outputs that you can listen to from all of the outputs, 7.1.4.2, 7.1, 5.1, and 2.0. And it does a nice job of folding all that stuff down automatically, which means I don't necessarily have to do that on my monitor controller, but I can also do it there. But the other thing is you can monitor binaural, and it sends the actual binaural fold down with all of your distances and things calculated into that. And that comes out a separate pair of outputs, a separate pair of buses. And then on my monitor controller, I have, I'll just show you that for a second. If I can find here. This is my Metric Halo monitor controller. If it's up here. Okay. Oh, desktop 3. So I don't know if you can see my monitor controller.
Oh, cool.
Okay, but this is, and I actually helped design this with the guys from Metric Halo. I said to them, how can I get immersive monitor control? You guys have a nice setup for 7.1.4, but I'd really love to be able to do. Sorry, they had 7.1, but they couldn't do 7.1 plus the overheads. So he said, well, how would you like it to look? And yeah, we can do that so that if you use 2 boxes and you get your 16 outputs, you'll have enough outputs to do it. So I took a snapshot of the regular controller and I said, just, put an overhead here and an overhead here and an overhead there and an overhead there, like just drew it in with, like a red scratch pen and sent it to them. And they were just about to release the update for their monitor controller and their, their new software. So literally 2 days later, I had it. But
wow.
like the modern day equivalent of scratching on a napkin. I just took a screenshot, colored it in, and sent it to them, and then they sent it back.
That's awesome.
But anyway, so here's my 7.1.4 input from my Pro Tools host, and in this case, it's coming from the Dolby Audio Bridge. And then there's my output to my speakers from the analog outs of my Metric Halo. But when I'm listening on headphones, I can just switch to Atmos inputs channel 17 and 18 on the computer host. And then I can listen either in headphones here, or if I go here, I can actually pick my, I have a set of Stax headphones here as well that I can listen on. But then I can, it's super easy to listen to the binaural fold down. So that's just an input configuration, switching to headphones here, and away you go. I'll switch back to listen. 1.4 here, and I'll stop sharing that screen. But that's how the controller works. The other cool thing about Metric Halo is that I have it configured. You can do bass sharing either in the Atmos renderer, or you can do more specific kind of bass sharing and crossover stuff and so on inside the Metric Halo software. So I'm using that for any EQ that I have, any crossover frequencies that I have for bass sharing. And so I have bass sharing configured in for my overheads and for my surrounds, because they're not, they don't go right down to 20 hertz like my ATC 50s do, my 45s. But that's all configurable and super easy to do inside the Metric Halo, monitor controller. It's really a great system.
I haven't used any Metric Halo or converters yet. I haven't. I've used pretty much just about any, like several brands, like at least 8 different brands, but not Metric Halo yet. I heard amazing things though. Yeah,
they're really fantastic. I would pretty much put them head to head in a lot of ways with emerging audio and people like that. It's like super high quality, like archival converters. And I mean, they were great before, but when they switched over to audio over IP with their last upgrade, so that's their Metric Halo 3D version, they went to a much more accurate DVE clock. That made the clocking even better and made the converting even better. So they just sound phenomenal.
Awesome. So I have the final question of this evening, and that is, where do you see the future of Atmos? Like, what do you think is going to happen to the industry and Atmos?
Well, this is a great thing about having guys at Dolby designing immersive audio, as opposed to the olden days when they had a bunch of stereo companies who wanted to just do, quad, is that Dolby sees it in a much more comprehensive way. It's a mix delivery system for post-production, for music, for film scores, for everything that is so comprehensive that, for example, for Netflix, they have adopted Atmos as their delivery spec because you can deliver all of the versions and all of the stems and everything in one wrapper and get it to them, and then they can use that if they have to do other versions for different languages and so on. Plus, with the way that the objects work, you can have the system set up to allow end users to control their listening experience at home. So if you want to listen with commentary on or off, you can choose that. If you want to listen with the narration turned up louder because you're old and you want to be able to crank the narration, it gives the home user that choice. Like one of the common comments that you see, particularly when you're mixing documentaries and things, is, oh, I couldn't hear the narration over all of those effects that they put in. Why would they do that? And often these are comments from people who may have hearing issues or their home system might not be set up all that well. But the way that Atmos is set up is that the plan is to make that user interface super easy so that the person at home can say, I want to hear that narration louder, and they can just crank it up. It's very, you just push it. All of those things are there, and it's all built into the system. So the idea is that as content creators, our possibilities are much greater in terms of what we can deliver, how we deliver it. But it also leaves things open-ended for the end user that, and you can make those things controllable in the way the metadata is set up, so that if you don't want people to touch that, you don't have to make that available to them. But if you do want them to have control over that, you can make that available to them. And that's the beauty of the whole Atmos system in general. Now, more specifically, as it comes to being immersive for audio and for gaming and all that kind of stuff, all of that stuff is part of the Atmos spec. And so when you're working in it, you can be super creative. You can have stuff that follows your head around if you're doing stuff for gaming or locked into place. All of those kinds of things are possible. And I think that when people are mixing pure music, they may want to keep stuff locked in spatial audio, or they may want to have it so that you can turn your head and, oh yeah, now I hear the bass over there, or the back, the choir that was behind me. Now, as I turn my head, it stays locked geographically against the room, and my head is turning inside it. All those things can be built into it. So I just think it makes for a much better interactive kind of experience.
Interesting, yeah. I mean, definitely the first step towards consumers getting into it is developing products, affordable products that people can buy. And I think that the first step was the new AirPods. It was definitely the first step towards popularizing this. Like people, they're going to see the earbud and they're going to see like that it looks different, right? And they'll wonder why, and then that will make them try it out and listen to tracks that were mixed in spatial audio.
I have a friend who is working right now on music for gaming, and he's been asked to start mixing in Atmos because gaming has been immersive for a long time. The virtual reality and all that kind of stuff. And so again, for delivering music for gaming, Atmos is makes perfect sense. Where you've already got an audience that's listening in immersive audio, and they've already got all of the spatializing where their heads turn and the things move in the game and all that kind of stuff. It's,
exactly. Yeah, usually in gaming, 'cause I used to, many moons ago, I used to work in the gaming industry, and in gaming, it's usually the music is what we call headlocked. So everything moves, but the music kind of stays. It's almost like in the video game world, the music is playing inside of your head, or in the case of like GTA or something, it's playing in the car. So it has a kind of like, effect that you're in the car playing through the radio, that kind of stuff. But it's definitely like, no, there hasn't been a video game where like the music actually moves with your movement. So it would be very interesting. I've heard of people experimenting with.
If that's part of the intention with the way music makes, then that would be cool to do. I did a gaming VR type mix actually just before I headed to that 2017 AES. And created all of the stems so that we'd have stuff that would be localized with everything inside the video. And we had the full 3D rendered video and so on, locked everything into that. And then obviously narration was headlocked, and the music was headlocked. But all of the other stuff, atmospheres, everything would move with your head, so that if there was a bird over here in your atmosphere, when you turned your head, it stayed geographically locked to the picture, which is super cool.
That's super cool. Yeah. So anyway, that is about it. that I wanted to know from your
All right.
perspective. And thank you so much for taking your time to do this. And I hope to hear more stuff that you're working on. And yeah, if you could drop me some links to put on the description of the YouTube video, then people can check out some of the stuff. And yeah, hope you have a wonderful evening.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for taking the time to do this. We appreciate all the effort you put into these. So it's fantastic. Thank you.
Excellent.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
For more information on the Toronto Audio Engineering Society, go to torontoaes.org. There you will find notifications on our upcoming events, past events, Masters of Audio, and our member showcase. The Toronto AES is brought to you by Solotech, Gare Audio, Sonotechnique, Bell Media, YSL Pro, Electrosonics Canada, BRTB, Global USS, Adamson, Lawo, avshop.ca, Q5X, and the executive team of the Toronto Audio Engineering Society.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Borham, and Matthew Borham will be talking about his company that turned immersive, and he'll give you more details on what it is about. I think he is the most different of our presenters because he's talking from the perspective of a company and a business offering a service instead of an audio engineer doing technical work. So here we go. I give it to you. Matthew, can you please give us an introduction of yourself and of the company, please?
Sure, and thanks for having me. I'm a longtime AES member, so always excited to be part of these things. So my name's Matt Borham. I'm from Maryland and west of Baltimore originally, and I grew up in that area and made my first professional go in Washington, D.C. at American University, which has an audio tech program. And so my journey started there. I went to school for audio engineering at American. It was really, really tiny at that time, kind of like a neglected program. So, I was just really interested that first off, I could get a degree in audio. And second, they were allowing me to like fix things in the studio. So I ended up staying there for years, for about 10 years or so. And during that time, I was one of the critical members of the team that built up the studios. I became the recording studio manager for many years, built a big studio, built a lot of classes on the technical side, and then, also just had fun running an audio program and building that up. So today I'm proud to say we actually have a, graduate program there at American, went from like 8 students to 130 or so. And yeah, it's just a lot of fun to be able to do that as a job. And then I ended up trying to find another job, and I wanted to go teach and do that all over again. And that took me to Montreal, to McGill, to get my PhD. So I got my PhD in 2020, finally. I started it in 2014. And it's in sound recording. I studied under George Massenburg and Richard King. Focus was on 3D audio perception and mainly understanding how to translate your mix from like a static or not static, sorry, a physical environment, so a real environment, to a virtual environment. And that could cover everything from like working in headphones and then trying to go into binaural in the same headphones, working in your studio and then trying to go to like the multi-channel Atmos room. Or what I was actually running experiments on was VR, early VR. How do you mix in a studio and then take it into VR, and what's that going to be like for everybody? So I was always really intrigued with mix translation as a topic, and meaning like not only how do I take one format to another, but what does the listener think of the mix that I did for the artist? The artist says they like it, I say I like it, but does the fan actually like it the way they hear it, or do they prefer to hear it a different way? So that brought me to this company. Audible Reality was started as a way to try to take immersive to the commercial audio world and building plugins and just trying to find different ways where that fit. First, it was about VR. Then it was about like trying to make YouTube sound better and lots of different things, make phones sound better. So today what we've actually settled on is an application, and there's many layers of our product, but the core is this application where you can take any existing stereo or mono track and make it feel as if it's fully immersive. And it does scale to full-on multi-channel rooms. It's best in headphones. That's what it's built to do, is to just make that streaming experience in headphones sound better. But as the CEO of Audible Reality, that's my job, is to try to find ways to help listeners have a new way to experience music, and then have artists have tools to take their music in a new format or a new direction. And so it's been a lot of fun. We have, DAW plugin to create 3D audio really easily. We refer to it as spatial mastering. It's essentially taking stereo and then remastering it into spatial. We have an app, like I said, that you can stream Spotify existing stereo and then convert it into as many different 3D experiences as you want. And we're working on some really innovative stuff right now that kind of blows my mind in terms of like applications. So things that are exclusive ways to hear music, things that will take the music out to, Atmos and other 3D formats. And so just having a lot of fun doing that. So yeah, that's my background.
That's awesome. Very interesting stuff. Can you explain what Audible Reality is and how it works? You can go pretty deep because a lot of our audience is very technical. So actually,
Sure.
The more geeky you get, the more interesting it will be for them.
I fully understand. Yeah, I don't get to do that much. So I mean, when you think about 3D audio, first the question is, what are you talking about? There's been so many misinterpretations of that word, and mainly because of marketing in the commercial industry, right? Like people trying to sell the next best thing, and they hear the buzzword binaural, so they start using it to describe spatialized audio in a multi-channel room, right? It's like not the same thing. So what we do specifically starts in binaural. Our goal is to try to take any sound, whether it's like multi-channel or stereo or mono, and realize that sound in a binaural process. So my PhD work was really about motion sensation, but during that work that I did, I realized there's some things that people react to positively in terms of binaural processes. And to take a step back, what is binaural if you don't know yet? It's essentially just how do we hear with our two ears, right? Binaural, we have two ears. It's not just about the ears, it's about the entire neural pathway of sound. So sound is physical, right? It's just pressure waves through space or through some medium. It hits our ears. It's still physical, right? We're just translating into vibrations within the mechanics of our eardrums and inner ear. And then as it goes through, it starts to become electrical. So it transforms into impulses within the brain. And then the brain detects those impulses and does something about that. And that's the cool stuff that happens in terms of binaural, is that if you can detect patterns that people respond to, you can start to understand what is good about binaural. It's like if you're listening to your mix in stereo, you're like, I'm going to have my friends come into the studio and check this out. I think it sounds great, but let's see what my friends think, right? You're always worried. You're like, oh, maybe I'm listening too bright. Maybe I had it too loud last night and I'm not hearing things correctly. But with binaural, you can actually figure out what works for people. You can actually determine, if I process it this way, whatever that way is, I'm most likely going to make this work for every single listener I have, or make it work for this specific individual listener. So what you're looking at is things like, unique filters, the HRTF you've probably heard of, the head-related transfer function. So a function of frequency, time, and intensity. When that sound hits my right ear, is it changed from my left ear? If so, my brain recognizes that cue or that pattern to say, oh, the sound came from my right about 10 feet away. That's kind of what your brain's always trying to do, is recognize the patterns it hears on a day-to-day basis to understand how to localize the sound around you. So if you take all that and you say, okay, well, now I have this processor that can just boom, make anything in binaural, make it come from any direction, make it feel as if it's in a room or in a car or whatever. You now have this really fun audio mixing landscape that you can take advantage of and start to put your music in and experiment with how it responds to the listener. And then take it one step forward. What we really do with binaural is we have an AI that detects the listening experience in terms of reaction, attention, engagement. And so we use that to understand, are you really engaged with this binaural process, or did that just piss you off and you turn off the app? Are you are you feeling as if the sound grew and you like that? Or can you hear the vocal more? And does that make it pleasurable or not? And so we look at things of like, how long did somebody listen to a track normally? When they put on the 3D audio process, using this many different binaural processes, what do they come up with? Are they more engaged than they were before they did that? And that's told us a lot. We've actually captured over 5 million data points on how people listen to music with 3D.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow, that's actually, I didn't think about that aspect when I was reading about the company, but it's so important, and that would be an interesting tool. I mean, I guess Apple Music's already doing kind of like the same thing. They're probably trying to figure that out, right? As well.
Yeah, I would say actually no. I'm really surprised that we are literally the only company I know of, and I've pretty much gone through the whole music industry and pitched this to a lot of different companies that I thought, oh, you would love this. We seem to be the only ones caring about this right now.
Yeah.
Most people care about the marketing aspect. Like, can I release Dolby Atmos because I'm going to sell more earbuds because you need this for Dolby Atmos because of Apple? That's kind of like the trend that I've seen as just an outsider audio engineer, right? But I have started to see personalization come into play. So people are starting to say, you know what? No, I want my headphones to sound flat. I want it personalized to me. So that's cool. We are seeing a rising trend in that. But as far as like collecting the experience and the data around that, I think we're the only ones that I've actually run into that have been doing it. And because we're doing it that way, we're actually learning a lot about how to produce in 3D. We can determine, like, if you take a mono track and you want to make that 3D, what's the best way to do that? If you want to take a bass drum and spatialize that, what would you do for most people that like hip hop, or most people like rock? For instance, rock musicians, they hate phase. So as soon as you do any process that changes phase, they hate it, right? So knowing those things is really powerful for an engineer. And that was our goal always, was to try to understand, how do you translate your mix, right? And then how could we figure out how to do that in a commercial way, rather than me, Matt Borham, the engineer, deciding what's best. I wanted to know from the listeners, how do you respond to that? And then use that data to help the artists figure out a better way to make their music with their engineers. So we're almost there. I would say it's really exciting. We have a ton of data. We are really accurate at making sound different and better to people, and we can predict it really, really well, but there's still going to be, errors here and there that we have to overcome. And so right now we're just working on ways to get the product out and get more people to use it, so that we have more data to process through.
One of the questions that I had was, different genres benefit differently from binaural rendering, from any sort of spatialization technique being used, right?
Yeah.
Dolby Atmos, Sony 360. Some genres, like you said, like rock musicians don't tend to not like anything that changes a phase, right?
Yeah.
But for instance, I noticed in my experience, I think that electronic music and jazz benefit very well from immersive for two different reasons. One, electronic music already plays with phase all the time, already plays with receptions of width all the time. And then you have for jazz, so much of jazz is recorded in mono, like with one microphone, right? So especially like older jazz recordings, they seem to do so well on these new immersive, which is, you wouldn't expect, right? But it totally makes sense. If you understand recording engineering, you understand that the way jazz was recorded in mono does really well with object-oriented positioning, right? Because it's just one mono source.
Right.
Whereas like stereo recorded information already contains phase differences, right? So you're like, in a way, you're like duplicating the phasing. And that is why, in my opinion, like rock music is not tends to not benefit from it, because in rock, you usually record the guitars, one take here, one take goes to the left, another take goes to the right. And those differences in timing create the perception of wider width, right? So if you add, head-related time transfer information into that on top, you're just adding more phasing, and it just sounds kind of like the guitar loses the low end, it loses the top end as well. Like you start getting, cancellation there. So there's actually a more a deeper reason why that doesn't work, or why it does, right? So
HRTFs are essentially filters, right? So, but they're mega filters. They are not like something you would do with EQ and just be like, okay, I'm going to carve out 3 dB here and whatever. They're like 20 dB dips, you know, and those dips could be, or peaks could be anywhere in the spectrum. They could be 7K, they could be 5K, 3K. There could be like 7 dips like that, and that causes comb filtering like crazy if you're just going to put it on top of something. So when you think about rock music and like you say, the guitars, well, yeah. So what we do as an engineer in stereo, without probably even knowing why we do it, we put it to the left and right. And the reason is broadband material. So we're talking like full intensity across the spectrum, right? It sounds best when it's decorrelated, when it's fully pushed away from the other sound that sounds like it. So that's the best way we can get it to separate. But when you try to binauralize that, and you try to localize it to a position, you're putting super high dips and peaks in terms of a certain frequency band on that, and you're going to get comb filtering all day long on that. There's no way to get around it. So music that sounds really full already, that like take classical music, it sounds amazing because it's recorded in amazing spaces. It's already stereo spread. It's the best you could probably get for an image. But when you go down to rock music is just loud and in your face. And we try to separate as much as possible by decoupling or pushing stuff away. So when you take that environment and you start putting these filters on it to try to localize it, it just thins it out and it becomes phasey.
Yeah.
And the reason that you say, you like electronic music, it's because electronic is very impulsive. Same with hip hop, and the jazz was a great example too. Anything that's going to be mono-based and impulsive will react really friendly with HRTFs because the impulse of an HRTF is very, very short, but a lot happens in that time. So when something reacts really fast and loud, you're going to get that effect, and your brain will recognize that pattern much easier than it will on a broadband consistent sound that doesn't really change over time. There's not much to update your brain and say, oh, that sound came from my right. It's just going to start to become mono. Actually, it gets kind of blurred. And one thing that I would love to preach to the world right now that I don't think many people have quite adopted yet is the idea of binaural masking. Something in a PhD about 3D audio we talk about every day, but in the studio, it's not something we deal with, right? We deal with regular stereo masking. But now binaural, if I'm mixing in a 3D environment, I got all these speakers around me, all these different localized positions. If I start adding too many of them without knowing what I'm doing, they're just going to mask each other. All these big peaks and valleys just become nothing. And so some of the stuff plaguing early spatial mixing is exactly that, is understanding that you can't just mix in a 30 speaker room and hope it's going to just translate down to binaural. You really need to think about, what am I spatializing? Is it valuable to spatialize that object? And, am I going to respond to it once it's translated down to binaural?
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, that I didn't know that what you're saying about impulse. Like, I learned a lot about HRTF in school, but we never went to that part, in terms of the timing and the impulse and the difference that the difference in the way our brain perceives that.
It's super interesting stuff. Yeah, and then you'll see in in research papers and people who do experiments on HRTFs, it's always a very short impulse. You don't use broadband material. You might use broadband pink noise that has a short window, but you don't ever use long clips. The goal is to have it impulsive Congo or a speech, that changes intensity over time. And the reason is that's how we localize. We localize best to those types of sounds. So, try it out. I would say throw in some drums and then throw in guitar, and you'll see what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah, exactly. That totally makes sense. And partly, partly also because the way that we localize things are related to how they reflect in the space. We kind of need to be in the space to know where things are. If we're in a vacuum, we don't really know where things are. You know what I mean? In a way. There's
that's true to some extent. So there's a thing called the cone of confusion in localization. Yeah. So that's from about 30 degrees to the opposite of that, 120 degrees. If you're in an anechoic room, or like you say, vacuum, where there's no reflection, it's almost impossible for the brain to detect where a sound is in that area. And that's the reason is the difference between the time of arrival to your ear from both sides is exactly the same in front of you and back of you at the same angle, right? at the opposite angle. So you are, as you say, you're reliant on reflections to really tell you what's happening. You're also reliant on movement. Your brain is always, as I say, you're looking for patterns and you're looking for differences in the patterns or contrast. So if you're able to move a sound, you'll localize it much better than you will a static sound. So all those things go into play into your mixes too. You know, think about that. If I want to create a really isolated, localized sound that might be in the cone of confusion for people, you know, maybe move it back and forth a little bit and help localize that position.
That's very interesting. And I have a question related to the BUOQ headphones. How does it interact with the app? How does it personalize the audio?
Yeah, that's called Buoc. They're a Spanish, Spanish fashion brand, really, is what they're about. They're more about lifestyle, and that headset was built because in Spain it's illegal to bike and have headphones on. So I have them here. I have them here. So this, what it does, when you open them up, they're actually speakers, and you can put them on your neck. And so when you're biking, you can do that. So that's why they were created. But the CEO of the company and I got together through like a mutual investor or something. I can't remember how. And we started talking about the sound quality. And he's like, man, I would love to be able to personalize these, because my customers, they love to like ride around like this, but then they like this. And, you know, they're always personalizing their sound experience. And it would be great to add 3D sound into that. So what we've done is we've tuned our 3D processes to those headphones, so that if you have the headphones open in speaker mode or on, you know, headphone mode, or if it's just sitting on the counter, we have different vibes, as we call it in our app. And a vibe is really just a 3D audio process. And you're running sound through the process, and it's tuned to those headphones. So you should have a big soundscape or whatever it is that you're trying to tune to. So it's a really cool example of, like, after you know the data of how people listen to 3D, you can use that for a greater good and trying to make a product more interesting and more, you know, fun for the end user. And then that makes the artist and the engineer have more success in the long term. Is, you know, our music works better on these headphones for this user.
That's really cool. So yeah, my next topic was actually going to be the vibes, you know.
Okay.
So can you know, for people who are not acquainted with audible reality, like, can you give an overview of what vibes consist on?
Sure.
And if you could dip on into the subject of like how you guys do that processing.
Sure.
Yeah.
So the vibe is essentially a preset. It's a 3D audio processing preset from our plugin. So you can download our plugin from our website. It's audiblereality.com. There's an app, and then there's a website for the plugin, which is artist.audiblereality.com. And they all connect to each other. The whole goal of this project and product was originally trying to understand what people like in 3D. So that actually grew into this business where we have a DAW mastering plugin. So it's a spatial mastering plugin. You can process any 2-channel or even multi-channel if you want. But if you're doing it for a vibe, you're going to take it and put it on your master bus. And you're going to say, okay, this is what my master sounded like before. Now I'm going to put this in spatially master with Audible Reality. Wow, I really like that sound. And so you save your preset and you upload your preset to your account on a online dashboard. You can put a nice, cute little picture with it, like an Instagram kind of thing. And then that becomes the vibe. And so now that preset is available in our app to any user. And so any user can now see your vibe, and they can connect to Spotify or any other streaming service that we have in the app, or listening on local music. And they can apply your vibe to any song they listen to. Now, that may work. It may totally suck. You know, the point is you're actually going to learn from that. We then take the data of how successful your vibe is. We track how many times it's been played. We track like experiential data that might be valuable to you. And we can give you feedback on the style of mix that you created. And so some artists are using it to actually re-release content and say, hey, here's a brand new way to listen to my music, download my vibe and just listen to the album again. Some people are using it to experiment and say, I'm like trying to figure out a style here. What do people think? Are they using it on hip hop? Are they using it on electronic? Some people just use it as like a giveaway and merch, as just a kind of a gimmick. But either way, all of that stuff exists. Like, you're getting all the data. You're really getting a pretty badass 3D audio tool that you can just use in the studio and make 3D all day long. But then you can also learn from it in the app. And So our whole goal has just always been to kind of just push things forward in terms of audio. We're never saying that our brand or our vibe or whatever is going to make your music sound awesome all the time. That's not going to happen. That is up to you, the engineer, up to you, the listener, to make that true. We just want to build the tools to get you there. So, some people absolutely love all the vibes. Some people hate all the vibes except one. But we learn from that, and we it's all about choice. I mean, that's really what it comes down to in art is what do you like? And if you have more personalization, you have better choice, you're going to have a better experience.
That's interesting. And I saw that you can also commercialize your vibes. So artists can also sell their vibes, which is really cool. Finding new ways of,
making them money. And
monetizing things is a great idea, especially for artists, like finding other ways.
Yeah, we don't quite yet have that launched yet, but that's coming out later this year. We're doing some exclusive things around that. But yeah.
That's such a great idea. And
thanks.
I have one question. Well, looking at the way your app works, have you thought about the possibility of in the future being able, this whole customizing experience of the vibes? What if in the future listeners could choose, I would like the guitar to actually be like behind me. I mean, I would guess that you would need metadata information about the mixing, right? You would have to get, an artist, an engineer would have to upload the music with metadata information of the location of different instruments to be able to modify them. But was that something that came into that you guys thought about that would be cool too?
Absolutely. Yeah. And we'll get, I'm very positive we'll get there. There's a lot of different technologies right now that can actually make that happen. Not as one, but as together. And so we are partnered with a lot of different people that will make it happen. And yeah, that's my ultimate goal is that, pure artistic freedom, both from the artist and the fan, I think is what the future of music is really about. Because let's be real, the best sound happened in 1970. We made awesome sounding records back in tape days. And so what are we doing now? We're trying to find new ways to hear music. It's always about HD. It's always about high, but really when you put the fan in place, that's where it becomes powerful. It's like now you have a direct interaction like you do in the live setting. So what will you do with that? And that's what, for me, that's what's the most exciting to come is like just finding different ways around Spatial. I think Spatial is a great platform for that kind of thing. Exactly. And just, putting it all together.
Everything about Immersive is about the future. It's still not settled in stone. It doesn't have its rules like stereo has. Well, whatever you consider to be rules. But what other possibilities do you see for developing new tools and applications for immersive audio? Like, where do you think immersive audio is heading towards? What's the future?
Yeah, well, a little bit of like what I just said is like if you could take a track and you could play with it. There's already companies that do stemming and like taking it from a stereo track and stemming it out, and then allowing you to play with the volume of each of the tracks. With 5G, it's totally possible that you could stream multi-track and again have access. So I think there's going to be a lot of fan interaction. Like it or not, I'm not a social media kind of guy, but you're not going to stop that beast. So really comes down to you have 50 million creators in the world on TikTok and everything else. They want to do something with sound. What can we as audio engineers do now to prepare for that? I think that the main thing here with spatial audio is that we have a platform that can do a lot of different cool things from, like you say, moving objects around, or like what we're doing right now is just like reimagining sound in a different way, learning from how people respond to it. Those are all great things. But do we just want everybody to have full access to our music and just let it happen? Or do we want to be part of that? And I think the answer is we want to be part of that. And so we need to think a little bit further than the studio sometimes. Studio records will always be done. I guarantee it. Like there's always going to be nostalgia. There's always going to be people who love the high quality of it and the experience. But fans want to be in the studio. They think that's cool, right? They want to be on stage. So what are some technologies and ways in Immersive that we could work with the fan and connect the artist and just make it all one thing? I think there's a lot of value there. So there's, for me, I just think the main theme here is interaction, is, getting everybody involved in the experience. That's what Spatial brings.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I believe that any tool that brings artists closer to their fans is going to work out. you know,
Yeah,
like every immersive technology that focuses way too much on either the product that it is trying to sell or on the technicality, it doesn't work very well. I'll give an example. You know, I mean, it's I find that some companies are attaching the immersive aspect to selling the product that does the immersive. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
To finalize, thank you so much for your time. And,
my pleasure.
I wish you good luck on your company that keeps on expanding. You know, Audible Reality is a great idea, and yeah, I hope you guys keep on growing and keep in touch. And yeah, if you have any suggestions of papers or books that people can read into that helped into your research and helped into the creation of your company, if you could send me a list, I'm going to put it on the
for sure,
to articles or books that people can, you know, look into, because the AES is an educational organization.
Yeah.
So, you know, for student members and also for already, you know, experienced professionals that want to read more into it, you could send me a list. I'll put those right under here.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Well, awesome. I'll leave you with two things, but first to that, I have a ton of books. And I think the thing that took me over the edge in my career as an engineer was learning about the way you perceive sound. It blew my mind, you know, as an engineer, just to learn how and why I did things and how people react. So I think if nothing else, I'll send you some links on that. That's stuff that any engineer should always know. Secondly, if anybody's interested in what we're doing, we do have a 30-day free trial of the plugin and the whole Vibe service, but then the app is totally free. So it's called the Audible Reality Vibes app. It's on iOS and Android. You need Spotify Premium right now to connect it. Otherwise, you can use local music. But yeah, if you're interested, check out and feel free to reach out to me. I'm always available and happy to take questions and whatever. So thanks so much for having me. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful day.
You're welcome. And, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for attending our event. The Toronto AES unites engineers socially. Within our allied arts, we collate, collect, and disseminate scientific knowledge that furthers all fields of audio engineering. The AES aims to empower people of all ages through participation in a healthy, safe, open community presentation. Learn audio engineering through events, presentations, networking, and mentorship. For more information, go to torontoaes.org. There you'll find over 30 years of meetings, events, Masters of Audio, members showcases, and much more. Our sponsors are the Solotech, Gear Audio, Sonotechnique, Bell Media, YSL Pro, Electrosonics Canada, BRTB, Global USS, Adamson, Lawo, avshop.ca, and Q5X. Give the gift of membership. Go to aes.org/join to join today. For more information on the Toronto Audio Engineering Society, go to torontoaes.org. There you will find notifications on our upcoming events, past events, Masters of Audio, and our member showcase. The Toronto AES is brought to you by Solotech, Gear Audio, Sonotechnique, Bell Media, YSL Pro, Electrosonics Canada, BRTB, Global USS, Adamson, Lawo, avshop.ca, Q5X, and the executive team of the Toronto Audio Engineering Society.
Well, hello everybody. So now we're going to start with our interview with Justin Gray, the wonderful Justin Gray, who is a mixing master engineer professor and has a lot of experience on immersive audio, specifically Atmos. And you also have an awesome YouTube channel where you talk, that's been a great learning tool for me, actually. All of your videos are excellent. I definitely recommend everybody check it out. And yeah, we're going to find out more about it through our conversation today. And let's get started with the first question I have for you. So I actually, before we get started with the question, and I'm going to cut that in the video, can you make an introduction of your professional life, like your story, and how you started off with Atmos?
Of course, and thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure. I love this community, and the opportunity to share is something that I'm really fond of. So, this studio that I'm in is a building that I actually built for mixing and mastering, as well as a little bit of sort of overdub production. My background definitely starts as a recording engineer, and just starting with the idea of recording a lot of my own music and just sort of being involved in sort of a recording engineer / producer role to just make some of my early music possible, and then that just continued to snowball into working with other artists in the community here in Toronto, specifically sort of within the jazz, creative, improvised, and world music community. And that's based on my background as a musician, but also just the sort of the community musically that I'm involved with. And from there, it stemmed very naturally into mixing, which I've been mixing music for the last decade in stereo content, but also in 5.1, and then eventually 7.1 because of my sort of interest in film. I've composed for film, but also just been a sort of someone to work with film composers to do some stereo mixing. And then I was always that keener who wanted to deliver 5.1 stems to the remixer, just because I've always loved surround music. I've loved listening to film in that way. And it's just been a part of my sort of musical enjoyment for a long time. Mastering has been the last 5 years for me. And I feel like it's really where my skill set and my interests really come and combine into what I feel is where I'm really at in terms of what, I guess in terms of how I want to be most commonly interacting with music, especially in a stereo context. I've found mastering to be where I just feel most at home. And I think I realized that the skill sets and the interests that I have in working on audio are contained in that practice. And so as for Atmos, when I had an opportunity to hear a 714 Atmos presentation, the minute I heard it, I was, naturally blown away, as I think anyone who gets themselves in a proper 714 array, we all have that experience. It's something else. It's like going to a great movie theater and experiencing a film versus watching it on your soundbar. I mean, it's quite profound. And when I had that experience, but then learned about the technology and learned about where it was going to go, this is about 4 years ago, I was immediately, it was something in my mind. And I had some conversations with various people in the industry who knew a little bit about it. I started fishing and talking to people in the film industry because obviously they were way ahead of and continue to be ahead of us in terms of using Atmos as a day-to-day tool for production. And I started to equip the studio one piece at a time over the last 4 years, so that by about 2 years ago, I was fully set up and starting to work in the format. And even then, there was a lot that was still being established. Things like the renderer and how it was behaving with Pro Tools. It was still in a pretty shaky place at that time. And ever since that point, things have just gotten better and better and better. The workflows have gotten better. And now I'm in a place where I'm working in Atmos on a daily basis. And we're going to get a chance to talk about that. So that's sort of the quick trajectory from recording engineer, producing situation to now working as a mixing and mastering engineer in this format. Excellent.
Thank you so much for that intro. So now let's get down to some of the geeky stuff. So what does your studio setup consist on?
If I do a screen share, I think you'll see it come up. You might lose me for a second, but I'm actually gonna show you a photo here. So you should see this now, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's where I'm sitting. You can see the Lipinskis behind me. So I have a 714 playback system. As everyone knows, that means 7 bed level speakers, 1 LFE, although it's actually 2 being summed into 1, and then 4 height channels. My LFEs and my 7 beds are Lipinski L707s, which I made that decision because I was already mastering and mixing on my Lipinskis for years. They're just a speaker that works for me. They work in this room. I love the tonality of them and the detail. It's something that just has worked for me. And so the minute that I wanted to go to this format, I sought out slowly but surely being able to fill that in, which was no small feat and certainly a bit of a risky investment, I will admit. But they are truly lovely speakers. They're extremely full range and bring a lot of detail to this experience. The subs are 2 of the older L150s. They're giant. They're just absolutely huge subwoofers on sound anchor stands. Everything's powered by Brystons in here. The conversion is an Avid Matrix, which uses the Digital Audio Denmark conversion, using the SPQ card, which is really crucial here for room tuning and speaker delay. When I worked with the Dolby tuning engineer for this space to bring it to the Dolby spec a couple of years ago, we used the SPQ card and this to dial in everything to the level that it needed to be. The room is really heavily treated with prime acoustic. In this format, headphones are crucial. I do just as much work using these, which are the LCD4s, which are my personal favorites. I'm looking forward to the LCD5s because it's quite possible that they're a little lighter. But that being said, the tonality of them is something that I sought out headphones that matched my listening experience. I've tried all sorts of headphones, and those are the ones that got me the closest. And so I spend a lot of time, which we'll discuss, doing the binaural sort of sonic averaging. SPL headphone amps. I do also advocate that it's essential to be using. The AirPod Pros are good. I do use these, which are the Apple AirPod Maxes, and I do some pretty important checking of the spatial audio tuning on those. For QC, you have an Apple TV and a Blu-ray player and a not an Ultra JD Blu-ray player, but an Ultra HD Blu-ray player. I can see the typo there, and an Atmos receiver. So I can come out of like a bit stream into that device into the Avid Matrix, which uses a lot of AD. But I really love listening to this content. So I listened to it over Apple Music. I listened to it on Untitled for a year before that, and I have a bunch of Blu-rays, as well as my old SACD collection and DVD collection as well. So that can all come into the system. And the last one is monitor controller. So I have a custom Crookwood sort of transfer console. That's a stereo transfer console, which has 15 inserts for all the hardware. It can also sort of go between a mix master setting in an interesting way so that I can pull things into my Avid HDIOs for mixing as individual inserts and then pull them back into the transfer path. But when I designed this, I was already planning for Atmos years ago. And so I have a very specific setting in here that allows my left-right speakers and my two subwoofers, which in that context are just used as low-frequency, like extension speakers in a stereo context, which like I can turn the subs on and off, and I can turn off like together in my stereo thing. I have a situation that just allows for a throughput, so that then I use the Digital Audio Denmark MOM controller, the monitor operating module, and the this program here, where is it? Which is Dadman. And this is the monitoring suite from Digital Audio Denmark, and it's brilliant. You've got all sorts of writing capabilities. Here is coming from my Dolby Atmos renderer. I've got different things. I've got various tunings, my EQs, like the whole EQ curve. All of the speaker timing has been programmed in. I've got it for 5.1 and 7.1 and sort of various capacities. So this is a really powerful, powerful tool. And what's awesome is I can use this one controller. I have buttons dedicated to like soloing the heights or soloing the things or muting everything but stereo, and then just one volume knob for everything. So that's a lot of technology, to say the least.
Yeah. So, I mean, this, I don't know if this was covered, but there are two ways that you can work with Atmos. One is using only one computer, right? And then another one's using the remote and having two computers.
Yes.
Which one of the two is the one that you're using?
I'm using one computer. It's not that I would be opposed to using two, but I have an HDX2 system. I would have needed to make an HDX3 system and done a whole bunch of other things that when you have a hybrid studio, because I'm still working in stereo, like I work in stereo all the time.
Yeah.
So and even then moving between like a mix template where I've got my HDIOs and this, and then to Atmos. It's really a lot of work to change all the routing to have 128 channels going in and out. I would have probably done MADI. Dante would have worked as well, I guess. And so, it was one of those last things where I was like, well, if it works, then I'm going to stick with one computer. And if it doesn't work, then I'll have no choice but to get a second computer. I think that the key is, I'm using a lot of UAD plugins. I have 16 cores of UAD processing, so that's offboarding work. I have the HDX system helps to offboard some work. Thunderbolt 3 and having like external SSDs and fast drives. Everything has to just be as fast as possible and trying to have as little processing as possible. And at a certain point in heavy mixes, before I render, I have to freeze tracks. That's just how it is.
Yeah. I imagine. Yeah, that's a question that I've been researching. I've been asking everybody that's working with Atmos, whether they're using one or two computers. And I would say that it's like half and half. It's pretty 50-50.
I'm open.
Have, like multi-room facilities, they tend to use.
Of course. Yep.
But yeah, like I found that it's pretty split.
Yeah, I'm certainly open to it. The fact is that the computers, as we go forward down the road, the computers are only going to get faster. Yeah. So, I think that for what I'm doing, it's working. I certainly see that if there were some major, if there were some changes to the ecosystem, where there was some other processing onboarded into the renderer, then we're all going to either have to have fully maxed out Mac Pros or two computers. At this particular moment, the renderer is usually hitting, if you're binaural rendering, it's using about 30% of my computer, which leaves me with the headroom to get things going. And then just like I said, depending on how heavy the session is, I just have to do some freezing of stuff if it's really aggressive. But I mean, even in stereo mastering, where you made a great post the other day about a Mac Mini M1, and if I load up a 9624 session with a bunch of Vice and DMG plugins, it's I'm freezing tracks. I'm freezing tracks there too. And I've seen the Mac Pros. I've seen a beautiful Mac Pro have to freeze tracks as well because of single core processing. So I just work on it. And honestly, at this point, I take my computer out of its case and give it a big hug. I'm really grateful for it on a daily basis.
Yeah. I've been playing around with Atmos on an M1, on a Mac Mini M1, and working great. The only thing is that I can only use the Atmos bridge doesn't actually work on it yet.
Oh,
I think they're about to on the M1, right?
Oh no.
But so you have to use the what's the other way?
Send return. You have to do a send return.
Send return, exactly. So I've been playing around with that, with the send return, because that's the only way of making it work on an M1 for now.
Okay, the Atmos bridge is beautiful, and I would not want to change for any I would have to be shown a better system to want to change using that.
So for those who are not familiar, Atmos needs to create an I/O because of all these channels that are used by the objects, right? And the way it does that is creating a fake playback engine, so to speak, which is the Dolby Atmos bridge, right? But that currently is not installable. You can kind of install it on your M1, but it doesn't really run. There's something with the security settings on the M1 that doesn't really get it to work. It doesn't see it when you have your Atmos render. It doesn't see it as an option on the drop-down menu.
Right.
Only the send return. So the other option of using Pro Tools with Atmos is using the send return feature, which disables room. Right. It disables the room simulation. I think it's
correct.
Possible with the send return.
Yeah.
So that's the only disadvantage. Yeah.
Exactly, but as with all technologies, and with one of your future questions, we're going to get there. But as with all technologies, I mean, Dolby is doing, and has been since the beginning, an unbelievable job, in my opinion, presenting an ecosystem that is really well thought out. And there are elements to grow, just like with any DAW, and it's not necessarily a DAW, but it's sort of it's an object-based tape machine. That's sort of what I see it as.
That is such a good way of putting it. That's exactly it.
Yeah. So it's like a digital object tape machine. And I have my studio over here. They share the duties.
Yeah. So the next question. So what do you find are the challenges and advantages of working with immersive content compared to regular stereo?
So to start with the advantages to me are in the potential, or in the artistic potential. We should be doing anything in music production to serve music at all times. And so in a context where spatiality, we're having the ability, it could be as simple as just adding reverb or a little bit of a touch of space around you, all the way until presenting sound sources coming from various spaces around you. When that serves the music, and when it can be done in a way that makes the impact of the music and the emotionality of the music even more meaningful, then that's the key advantage. That's why I'm in it. I'm in it because of its artistic potential. The minute I heard it, it just clicked with me. It clicked as something that I wanted to be able to interact with space that way. And again, I've been doing this in 5.1 and then eventually 7.1 for years before that. In many ways, some of my 5.1 and 7.1 work, other than stem delivery for remix, for film deliveries, was mainly creative because I really didn't have an opportunity or a justification to make DVD audio or SACD. That ship had sort of sailed by the time I was into it. So I've been making creative music in that format, including exploring ambisonics, exploring early binaural renders by different companies and trying things out. I've always been very curious about it. What Atmos does, the main advantage is I think that they bring together all of these different areas of immersive audio into one ecosystem. They've really thought about it. They've thought about pulling in some of the best qualities of a lot of the history of this of multi-channel audio, and they've thought about it in a way that is deliverable. And so the main advantage here is, I think, why we're all into it, is and why the interest for it is its ability to be all the way from a 916 or a 714 in my context, down to a binaural render, down to a stereo render. That sort of one file delivery system, that's how Kerry Thomas from Dolby has sort of described it, that one single deliverable that then in an ADM BWF file is able to branch into so many things with such ease. They have thought about that technology. They've integrated it in what I feel is a very musical way, a very efficient way. And yes, is there room to grow? Of course there is. It's brand new. I mean, something I wrote down in preparing for this is just being reminded that stereo goes back to the 1930s, like Alan Blumlein, and then it's like late 1950s that we get stereo, like real stereo records. Like and then what I made a note is that, like, for instance, on the Mastering Engineers Forum, on the Facebook Mastering Engineers Forum, which I just adore, like Jonathan Weiner and Bob Katz and a whole bunch of people who I have a great respect for. They've recently published TD 1008. I mean, we're still working to even remotely agree on loudness normalization standards, on best practices for stereo. Alan Blumlein thought about, like, this stuff started, we're going to be like looking at 100 years in not too long. You know, the little 50s is when it really starts to become commercialized. So, like, whatever, 80 years. Yeah. Atmos's spatial audio from Apple is what, 6 months old? 6 months old. The fact that we're even talking about it in the capacity that we are and the type of detail just goes to show how incredible the ecosystem is. And so I just look at it that way. I look at, yes, I got suggestions for days. I do reach out to Dolby. I try to reach out to companies like Apple, but all I am really is grateful for their thinking of a way to make this possible, to create a format that now can bring this to people in a more meaningful way. Again, just to sum up a couple other advantages, dynamic range. Dynamic range is celebrated in this format, which is, I think, something that we can talk about in more detail, even in the example or like the demo that I'll do at the end of this video. And yeah, just dynamic range and just creative potential, just new creative potential. You know, some music will really benefit from this. The disadvantages or the challenges, technology. I think what we're mainly up against in a new format like this that really does demand, like, so much of our computers, so much of our studios, is technologically, this is a huge feat. Like so many of us in this community, I'm obsessed with technology. I love it. I live and breathe it every single day. I sit at this spaceship and try to, you know, I'm happy when it turns on. I'm happy when it's working. I'm underneath the desk when it's not. Yeah. And this is an epic technological system. So many things need to work. And all it takes is like an M1 chip or one little thing to throw the whole thing off. It's a very complex ecosystem. And so, again, I celebrate where it's at. I think it's working quite brilliantly for what it is, but that's definitely a challenge. I think that aesthetics is a challenge because with great power comes great responsibility. And with 12 channels to put things in, the potential to do things because we can is very high. And that is not ultimately how I think the most meaningful music is going to come. The most meaningful music is always going to come because of intent. Yeah. And when that intent is met with skill, I think we see the productions of the history that we value. And so the skill sets required to make this format, to really work in this format at a high level, they're epic. You know, it takes stereo mixing and says, all right, let's like add another 100% to this. Not that the principles of working in Pro Tools are still not, they look the same, but they're not the same. Yeah. And so for anyone who's coming at this cold from stereo straight to 714, they should, you know, take a deep breath and recognize that is a huge leap. I mean, it's not even necessarily a fully logical leap. I've had the fortune of working in 5.1 and working in 7.1 and thinking about it and listening to music in that format, largely a lot of classical music, because that's the European classical stuff has been presented in that format the most. That's like where I got the most SACDs and DVDAs that I have. So for anyone coming at it fresh, I say just the same as with stereo, we got to go back and look at this beautiful history that we have of multi-channel audio, and the aesthetics have already been presented. I don't like this idea that like Atmos is here, 714, it's all brand new and invented. It's like, no, it's a very logical linear process.
Yeah. Now you have height.
And so does Oro 3D. So does DTSX. Like, so does, height is not even only them. IMAX. I mean, we've all been to a theater. We've been experiencing height for some time. Yeah. So what Dolby's really done is I think that they made a great decision in terms of 714. I think, or 916, like in terms of the principles of what the system is. Although I think Oro 3D is also awesome. Like, I think that they do present audio in really meaningful ways, and I love those discussions. I love those are some good ones. But what Dolby has done is they've made decisions as to, we're going to take this from this, this from this, this from this, and we're going to present it this way. And the object-based system is quite powerful. So yeah, the challenges I think are just technological, developing aesthetics, and people taking the time to study the potential of multi-channel audio, because it's already been done a lot. There's already a lot of meaningful content. Like, spatial audio playlists on Apple is the tip of the iceberg. And thinking that that's the world of immersive audio is a bit of a mistake. Go back, study the sort of trajectory of people who've been putting up multi-channel arrays and making brilliant recordings for a long time that work really well. Yeah. And then the skill sets. But, skills come in time, and that's what all this is about too, is sharing and trying to try. So the skills are the easiest part, I think.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I think that, we're still figuring out the language, so to speak. Like, you listen to early stereo recordings and they're so excited about having two speakers that they decide to put an entire drum set on only one speaker, Those decisions are like, just because that's available, let's do it, instead of like, wait, that doesn't sound very balanced, or, those aesthetic rules, conventions, they're going to start to become a thing once more and more people are involved in mixing and mastering for Atmos. So my next question is, how do you see mastering into this whole thing? Because, let's start with the obvious, that, the renderer doesn't have limiters and compressors that you can apply to the entire thing. So essentially the premise of sending a mix and making it sound better is not quite there at the present time. Do you think that in the future that may be a thing, or how do you see mastering involved in the process?
So as you would have seen in some of my YouTube content, I believe, not only do I believe, I've put out 3 masters for people who mixed in Atmos this week. I believe in it 100%, and I'll explain why. First of all, it's important here that we define the parameters of mastering. And so I have a little thing here that I'll just read because I wanted to. So like the idea of, first of all, prep and QC of final assets. The asset delivery here is not easy. It's not simple. And I have a lot of questions to answer to a lot of, people at labels, people at artists, people at, staying on top of that is one of the roles of a mastering engineer. Finalize. So then it comes to like tonality, dynamic range, loudness, sequencing. All of those things are still absolutely at play, and I'll explain sort of the workflow that I'm using in a second. The biggest one, the most important one, is just trusted ears, experience, and aesthetics. As a mastering engineer, the reason someone sends me a stereo mix is not to make it louder. I'll tell them what limiter I use. I'll, go get Limitless by DMG, get FabFilter Pro L2, and put on some oversampling and have a blast. You can get that loud in 20 seconds, no problem. Whatever, even the Avid limiter, it's like you could push minus 10 LUFS with no problem, no clipping, no issues. That's not what mastering is. I think that hopefully everyone would know that. Now, is loudness a part of our role? Absolutely, and it is in Atmos too. It really is about our ears and our aesthetic values, and being able to very confidently make decisions about what we've been sent. And so that's the exact same here. There is no difference. The trusted sonic environment for translation and the tools. Again, when I designed my space, everything is mastering spec. I didn't make a single decision that didn't meet my current mastering spec standard. Every converter is Digital Audio Denmark. Now that comes at a cost, no doubt. And it's not something that I would recommend for someone who doesn't absolutely adore the format, because it's going to be a period of time to justify that. You got to want to work in this format. I think that it would be a mistake to just do it because it's popular. It's something that I really just deeply believe in. And mastering has therefore become a part of that. The majority of what I'm doing is mixing. There's no doubt. And I'm not going to, try to blur the lines. Like we'll discuss the fact that they're definitely linked. But, and the last one is again, an intimate and current understanding of delivery standards and the end user experience. So when I think about those roles, which are far beyond putting a limiter on a collection of content, I'm reminded that for someone who's working in a lesser sonic environment, for someone who's got a whole Neumann K120, smaller, not full range, or certainly not mastering grade speakers set up, and doing awesome mixes. Someone who's only working in headphones, which is lots of engineers. I have great mixes coming to me from really creative people who called me after I made some of my YouTube content. They're working for labels in the States, who said, hey, I really enjoyed what you said. Can we talk about this for a second? And my philosophy is, look, I would rather someone work on a pair of these than work on a bunch of lesser than not tuned, not timed, not even calibrated properly 714 speakers.
In a bad room too, yeah.
In a bad room that's if we had trouble with stereo placement, which we do, again, one of the reasons mastering exists, one of the reasons a mastering studio is such a thing. Atmos is that it's just compounded in a pretty exponential way. We've got sound just bouncing everywhere from everywhere. I would prefer to receive a mix from someone with a killing amp, great conversion, and a good set of headphones, and most importantly, great aesthetic values and intent. That's what matters, creativity. I'm getting those mixes in. Some of them are awesome, but they've made some decisions on headphones that need to be rectified. I need to make sure that it works in the system. I need to do some tonal balancing. So what I call mastering in this format is multi-channel, object-based stem mastering. It's a multi-channel format, but and that's not to say that multi-channel hasn't existed before. There's 5.1 and 7.1 mastering engineers who do discrete channel mastering brilliantly. Object-based. Object-based is mandatory. The objects have to remain in play until the final render. There's no way around that. There never will be, or it won't be Atmos. It'll be something else. And then stem mastering. As a result of the objects needing to stay in play, the stems are crucial. But even in stereo, even though I don't personally do a lot of stem mastering in stereo, I'm all stem mastering here. So what happens is someone sends me an ADM BWF, which they export from their renderer. I session import that into Pro Tools, and it's absolutely brilliant. It comes up, the beds stay as 712 beds, all the objects or pairs of objects, now the naming structures are lost, that's too bad, but object 1 through 128 essentially. Yeah. Typically 11 through 128, because usually there's a 712 bed. Yeah. And now I have all of the stems, basically a stem out. Everything is with its processing done, but the object and its object metadata, which is the panning metadata, is alive and well, communicates with the renderer, and now I have a full stem out of the project. Yeah. And my role is all of those things. It is also loudness, because I'm getting stuff where sometimes it's a little too quiet, or sometimes it's way too loud. They've been clipping the binaural render 8 decibels because there's a limiter in there, which they should have never put. I know, protect your ears, but it's having a permanent limiter is a mixing into a limiter is a dangerous practice. We all know it, unless you're doing it intentionally, of course. But just having it on means we're definitely going to just be pushing it. At a certain point, you're just making moves, you're turning things up, and it just starts to limit for you. And I will say that, for those of you who know, the target loudness for Dolby Atmos is -18 LKFS, and that is based on the 5.1 render of the Dolby Atmos file or the Dolby Atmos project. And getting that sometimes even to -18 without clipping, without binaural clipping, with tonality and punch and everything alive is a lot harder than people give it credit. I've seen all sorts of forum posts saying, oh, why are they choosing this super quiet? I'm give it a try. I'd like to see you hit -16 on a 714 render with keeping all these things in check, because we have to remember that that render is a 5.1. That means that's and that's for very technical reasons, because that's what's used to create some of the fold downs later on. Yeah. That's a sum. We're summing multiple channels into less channels. So when we come to that binaural, we've turned 12 channels into 2 channels. It's the same as a bus. When you take single channels and you mix them into a stereo bus, all of a sudden the sum of the parts is louder. So take 12, put them into 2. -18 is a lovely target, but I do not I keep it in mind because it is the normalization. Currently, it's referred to as the normalization standard, where if it's louder than that, it will be turned down. So it's like a loudness penalty type of rule. But it doesn't matter to me. I will present the music at the loudness that I feel is appropriate. And again, that's the job of a mastering engineer, to make that call. Interestingly, in Atmos, I turn some things up, which is really hard. Every like 0.5 of a decibel of headroom is like a ton of work. Automation, automated compression, sidechain limiting, tons of techniques that like, I feel like I'm going back to like old school console, like where it's like, okay, turn that down over there. Here comes that drum hit. Like I'm automating. I'm like a transient hunter going in there, just like, oh, there's that one that's killing me. There's this. It's like, I'm doing the limiting. Now, it's actually made me revisit some of my own mastering practices, made me realize the beauty of volume automation over limiting. And I believe in that as a mixing engineer, but my goodness, am I being reminded of the power of just turning something down versus compressing it. We maintain the transients. And just so anyways, that's been a really lovely sort of learning experience and just experience for me on a daily basis with the mastering specifically. But I also have stuff where I get it and it's slammed and I'm turning it down. That's an interesting one. It's interesting to be taking things and saying, no. For the benefit of this, we actually need to present it at this volume. Tricky discussion to have with clients, as we know in the world of mastering. No one ever wants quieter. Yeah. But that's where the confidence comes. And that's where, like, again, so I hope I've, whether I've sold or not, I don't know. But these are my beliefs. And more importantly, it's working. I mean, it's working for clients who are interested, engineers who are really creative. And we've got a workflow. And thus far, I'm really excited about the opportunity to just continue that mastering tradition into this format.
Excellent. I actually have some questions regarding the workflow. I mean, part of mastering is sequencing, right? Sequencing songs in a record. Mm-hmm. How do you do that in mastering? With Atmos, because I mean, you can't really, unless you have the entire album in one file, in one Atmos file. I wonder how you do it.
Right. So a couple of considerations. The first is sequence the record in stereo, and then there's no reason in Atmos that we can't use stereo to our advantage. Sequence the record in stereo. This is what I've done for full records, is that I do a binaural or stereo mix out. Then I'll put that in a stereo session. Me and the client will work on the file links there. Then I'll re-import them back into the Atmos, and I'll use those as my in and out points. That's been, that's a pretty simple solution. Doesn't take too long. The other is, and there's a project with someone I'm working with, who I worked with. It's already done. This one is truly epic. It was one of the early projects for me. It took a long time. And he is a brilliant, his name is Jonathan Kotchuk. He's a good friend of mine. He did some really brilliant, very creative multi-channel composition. And where everything's discrete channel. And he was like well ahead of Atmos. And we got connected through Dolby, actually, because Carrie at Dolby was like, hey, Justin's here in Toronto, I want you to work together, because he wanted to be able to bring this into the format. And because it was going to Blu-ray, and because it was specifically going to Pure Audio Blu-ray, who their aesthetic is to actually print it as one long file like vinyl, so that you don't have gaps in the Blu-ray sort of start and stop, which is just sort of part of that ecosystem. Oh my goodness, we had to take an entire record, and some of his tracks he did everything. Everything is as 11 channel arrays, almost everything. I had sessions with 400 stems.
Wow.
And just figuring out how to, I'm hoping at some point Jonathan and I can present this record at an AES conference. It's one of the most hyper complex. Just routing alone took me a couple of weeks of actually just considering from start to finish, so that I didn't make any mistakes, of like how to bust things down into 128 objects based. And then we did a checkerboard of like 60 objects and 60 objects, which is 5 groups of 12, and printed those all out, brought the stems into a full session, turned those into discrete channel objects. I mean, it's ridiculous. And it was really fun, and it allowed for the sequencing. At the same time, for my own record, which I finished more recently, I just did the stereo version. I just sequenced it in stereo, because like, oh my goodness, it's over the top. I mean, it's pretty epic. It's like taking a vinyl master where you pull everything in and make one long side A, side B.
Yeah.
Just making one long side, but with hundreds of tracks.
Yeah. Oh my God.
And a limit of 128 points of access. That's the real challenge. Is like we do have a bottleneck of that number of 128. And so sequencing is, again, I think one of the cool things about Atmos is it's forced me to think a lot, especially in the early days. But I will say, like, I spent 2 years, I spent COVID, the whole period of time, just working on various projects, some of which were my own, some of which were other people's, not even for the intent of like release, because even though Tidal was already doing it, and they were doing it really well, actually, no one caught on. No one was willing to jump across the goal line. So I just kept working on it. I printed out stuff. I spent time paying money to go to sound stages to hear stuff, like sort of test out my own. Any opportunity I had to check a file somewhere, I would take it, just to try and practice and just try to get that workflow underway. So when Jonathan came to me, I'd already considered a lot, and that one pushed me to my very, very limits. And ultimately, what's awesome about that record is it starts in Atmos. First of all, it starts in multi-channel recording, and that's the bomb. That's the best. But that's been proven before. Jonathan's not the first. We've got a whole history of people doing this. Like Morten Lindberg, as an example, is one of my heroes. It's been done. It's been done really well. And taking that, then we have from the Atmos file, we have our Atmos for Blu-ray. We have our Atmos masters for Apple Music, which is a different loudness standard. Then there's a stereo fold down, supervised stereo fold down, where we remixed it in stereo while listening to it in stereo from the Atmos, spit those out, and then mastered those, and then did a separate vinyl master of those. So he has a record that's going to be on vinyl all the way to pure audio Blu-ray and everything in between from a single Atmos session. And it is so awesome.
That's crazy. I haven't heard that before. So it's all like a down mix from Atmos in a way.
But a supervised down mix. So listen to it in stereo and then adjust until you like it in stereo, including like sometimes you have to move things. Sometimes things don't work. So you're like, okay, cool. I know how it sounded. I don't think you can do a supervised down mix, like unless the artist is with you, of course, but like you need to know the music really well. Yeah. By the time you finish your Atmos, then you have a chance to go in and say, okay, what worked? What's missing? What sounds weird? Exactly. Let's fix that. Yeah. And there's a lot of principles that went into making that work. I think a lot of it comes down, as with all music, to the original capture. Yeah. Proper 11-channel capture, proper 7.4 capture is like the key to healthy fold downs.
Exactly. It makes all the difference in the multi-channel recording if you are placing your microphones in relation to your source, almost like an inverted version of, like the microphones are placed in distance from each other that is correlating to the distance of the speakers. That's very much done in classical music, right? Hearing that is a whole other experience because you're hearing the truest form of the truest form of being in the space.
Yep, exactly. And my personal wish with, and I know one of your questions is going to come to this, so maybe we'll save it for that. But that's what we need to be talking about for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So so you're talking about Tidal and how it didn't really caught on that. Do you think that Apple integrating Atmos at no extra cost will change the world of immersive music and make the public become more interested in it?
I think it already has. It's the minute that it happened and the way that they presented it gave people access like they've never had before. Not in the sense that it wasn't available. If someone wanted to seek out the experience, they could. But listeners and consumers in general need the technology to be given to them very clearly and very simply. Is sort of a nice way to say it. And what Apple did right off the bat is, again, are there suggestions for making it better? Of course there are. But right off the bat, to come out and make this profound of a change this quickly is worth congratulation. It's worth congratulating them over. They've taken a chance with this. They've really, they've really put it out there as something that's meaningful. And because they're Apple, and Apple has this sort of, this space within the world, people are listening. Now, I will say that one of the challenges is that their way of marketing it, and it's, in all fairness, it's none of my business how they market what they're going to market. And ultimately, this format will be tied to the consumer element. It will be tied to the financial success. End of story. As much as I want to work in it, it always is. Follow the money. Follow the money. Creatively, doesn't matter. I'll keep doing whatever I want creatively. Other artists have had the ability to make multi-channel audio for a long, long time. We could have been making binaural audio for the last 30 years, 40 years since it was sort of initially presented. Why are we only doing it now? Because of the way it was packaged and presented to us. So that comes with their ability to market it. The one thing I will say for our community is the way it was marketed, of this like Atmos is here and stereo's over. That to me was unfortunate and unnecessary. Multi-channel audio, 714, object-based audio, it is just another medium for presenting art. And it is meaningful and it is awesome. And I will vouch for it. And I hope that when people get a chance to listen to my example later or other ones that I'll share, I hope that they experience that meaning. I hope that the emotion of the music is impactful. It's all that matters. Who cares how it's done? Whatever. Does it sound good? Does it mean something at the end of the day? And stereo is equal. Like, to me, these things shouldn't have been pit against each other. First of all, Atmos is like a baby in the world. Again, 6 months since spatial audio, since most people started doing this, versus 80 years of tradition, and like so much energy behind what stereo is. And we're still arguing about loudness and normalization standards. So in fairness, I would say to the community that let's not let Apple's decision to pit them against each other make us do the same. I say embrace it for what it is, celebrate it for what it is, encourage it for what it is, and don't worry if it's like, I don't see it as like, okay, now everyone move over here and never do stereo again. No way. It's absurd. It's absurd to say it out loud. No one's thinking that way as artists. And the ones who want to do it in Atmos, most of them also are coming with already produced stereo content. And I think that there's always going to be, first of all, stereo. We're talking about the peak of the mountain. Atmos is sort of at the bottom being like, hey, I got something cool to say and I'd love to be a part of the club. But I sort of think of Atmos in this way where it's like, it was thrown into the ring in this somewhat aggressive way. When really it's like, no, I just want to make some really fun, new, engaging experiences here. Like, my goal wasn't to remove stereo. I'm doing more stereo than I am. Well, these days it's more Atmos than stereo. It's interesting, actually. But like, that's just me. That's a very small portion of it. So I do think that Apple has had a huge impact. I congratulate them on it. I'm grateful for when it happened. I was literally waiting. Like a year ago, I was like, well, when Apple does it, then the door's open. Because Tidal had it. Tidal was playing DDP JOC files on Androids. They actually use the AC4 IMS file, which is the binaural render.
Yeah.
Apple, if you're listening, it's a really smart idea.
Different chips, though. It's because the chips that Androids have allow for that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that comes down to what they didn't want to pay for the chip. I don't know. Again, not my table to make a comment on. Yeah. Apple's entitled to do what they got to do. The initial rollout of Spatial had a couple things, but it's been changing, and it's been changing for the better. I listen on a regular basis, and I have noticed that the spatial audio render is adjusting, and it's happening behind the scenes, and it's a good thing. And so I say patience. I think Atmos deserves a little bit of patience for these little fine details. But yes, I do think that Apple had a profound impact on immersive audio and the awareness of it for the world.
The last question before you give us a little demo at the end of this interview. How do you see the future of immersive audio?
First of all, I see right now we're in a period of upmix work, which is the respace. I rather than upmixing, I like to refer to it as spatial remixing. I don't expect anyone to take that on, but I like to use language that reflects the way I think about something. So I am remixing something. It was already mixed. It was already mastered. It's a remix, and it's a spatial remix. I'm actually not trying to adjust the majority of the art piece. I'm just trying to respatialize it. That period of time can't last forever, because at a certain point, the catalog will reach a point where labels or previous artists will just want to focus on new music. New music is where is our next step. Our next step is composing with this in mind,
Exactly.
is recording with this in mind, and producing with it in mind. And what I'll say is that every single artist who has sat here and listened to their work in this space has had nothing but just goosebumps, smiles, and an instant, very, very consistent reaction to, oh my goodness, I cannot wait to think about this when I'm making my music. And that's it. That's where I'm like, yes. That's it. Just think about the fact that it changes the potential for some composition, not all composition, but some. And so if someone can find a way to have been inspired to think about space being a factor and an element of their compositional palette, then this format is for them. Then that also can be augmented by microphone technique. We need to start getting more microphones in the room for things that are going to reach this format. Because I think of it like this, a stereo stem is like it's 3-dimensional. It's 2-dimensional. When we move sideways, it's flat.
Yeah.
This is, these are the weird things that keep me awake at night. So when they're up front, it's there, right? But the thing is that we've been used to listening in that 2-dimensional space with the phantom content in the middle, of course. But when I start to pull it back in the space, it's thin.
Yeah.
There's nothing here and there's nothing here.
Yeah.
So I have to create that. Anytime I'm moving something back, first of all, some things can't be moved back. If they weren't recorded properly, if there's any sort of phase issues and anomalies in it, it doesn't sound good. You start moving it back and it starts to get thinner and you're like, nope, this isn't the right one. Like those are big parts of the mixing. And that's why you need to be in a proper space to make final decisions. In headphones, it's very forgiving. The binaural render is very forgiving. I think it's awesome, but it's very forgiving. So when I can instead have to do this, but rather I have 7 microphones and I can decide the depth, if it's done properly, unbelievable potential. Unbelievable. And I'm not personally talking even about like, great 7/4 array DPAs proper with an orchestra. That's another thing, of course, where people are spaced. It's almost like going back to gramophone times like 7,000. Where people are, that's the Morton thing. Morton Lindbergh. Yeah. My favorite album is Lux, which won a Grammy a couple of years ago. Morton produced it. It's so awesome. And Nidaros Cathedral Girls Choir and Trondheim Soloists. It's brilliant. And that's like they're spaced out with the array in the middle. It's like it's awesome. Good proper gramophone with 11 microphones.
That's awesome.
And like not even spots, no spot mics to my knowledge. Yeah. If I'm wrong on that, someone can chime in, please. Now I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about smaller versions of that for individual sources. Because I will admit, I love a good object placement. I like taking something, discreetly putting it somewhere when it's musical. Yeah. It's fun to be able to throw something on the ceiling when it works. It's also inappropriate at times. We have to, this is where the aesthetics come into play. But that can't happen in that context. In that context, it's like discrete channel audio. You place the microphones in the speakers and let the original recording do the work. Here, I want to have deeper 3-dimensionality to all of the sources and a really powerful computer. Because that's just going to slam. That's like, I already experienced this with Jonathan's project. It was like, oh my goodness. But it made a big difference. And I experienced it and it was inspiring. So, and then I think we'll see that for the user experience, we're going to see Atmos continue to have effects in video games and VR, in cars. Yeah. Although hopefully self-driving cars, because people are going to get real distracted.
I've been having discussions about immersive audio and Atmos and Sony 360 with a lot of engineers. And all of their opinion is always like, oh, I don't see this catching on very hard because, consumers will not spend money on like all these speakers or like good headphones. And I'm like, what about Beats? They're bad headphones, but they're expensive. Like people are willing to spend money on headphones if they're cool, if they're marketed as cool.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
We have to, yeah, exactly. We have to follow the money in that way. And that's where it's not guaranteed. None of this is guaranteed. So speculating on it could be seen as pointless, but because we're speculating, I think that if we see Dolby, Avid, Apple, more importantly, Apple in that conversation being like, Apple, largest organization on the planet, or if not one of them, if they're behind this, they have invested interest in continuing that from a financial standpoint. And so I think what we're going to see is some headphones like next AirPod Maxes, for instance, probably and just addressing sound quality. I will say these are a surprisingly good set of headphones. A little bit bright, no doubt, but they're surprisingly good set of headphones. Like for the money, I'm impressed. So I could see Apple continuing to up the quality and people getting into it because whether it's because it's cool or whatever, that's their job. I am hopeful at like the last stage of it, as far as I could see happening, is like Sonos, their sort of ARC system. When Apple unveils something, whether they're working with Beats or Harman Kardon or one of those companies, when Apple unveils a really, really smart system for multiple speakers that ping each other, that read a DDP JOC like off a phone wirelessly, we could see quad happening with like quad, let's say, plus a soundbar in the middle, so like a 5.1. I think we could see that happening very reasonably. If they were charging an amount that is not over the top, when people don't have to buy an amp, no cable runs, no like retrofitting their house, I could at least see a pretty substantial, I could see people, at least a group of people, enough people getting into that if they make it good enough. Because when someone sits, like again, for all of the, I mean, I'm not really swayed by it for the people who say, yeah, it's never going to catch on. Again, I'm not in this for it to catch on or not. That's like all my job is to make the best content that I can every day. That's all I can do. I'm going to just keep doing that. And then I can speculate and imagine. The reason that I hope listeners have it is not so that I continue to have a job. It's so that they can have this experience or something close to it. Because like I said, every single person, I go to, I work with Universal, Warner, and Columbia at the moment as like a upmix engineer or spatial remix, if whatever they call it, upmixing. Every time I've gone down to the ADA, which is Universal's beautiful Atmos room in Liberty Village, just, oh, it's gorgeous. And the clients come in. Like for instance, an album I did, a full album for the Arkells not too long ago. They came in not really knowing what the format was. They know their music well. They care about their music. I have an opportunity to just sit them down in the room. And we just had, like, every time is such a good time. Because they're sitting there being like, oh my goodness, I didn't even imagine that this production could do this. And so that joy, that's the key. So if we can have people somehow have some sort of affordable, I mean, obviously we're still talking about a pretty privileged class of people, of course, but in the world of like people who buy a bunch of stuff from Apple and want to have a better sound system, or junior audiophile level sort of people and listeners, right now, if I could buy like 5 speakers, they're wireless, I press play and it works, I don't know. I think people could get into that. And then I think they might buy 2 more. And then I think when they put the ceiling versions, if they're really simple, I thought about this though. The ceiling one is tricky because of power. They'd have to be willing to run like a cable down the wall or something. So that might be too much to ask. But like wireless high quality with like tuning and volume calibration based on the pinging of the space, that happens. I think we could see the most access to immersive audio that we've ever seen, personally.
Well, I agree. I definitely agree. I see a lot of potential. I see a lot of potential if Apple tries to capitalize not only with on the streaming end, but they also get into product development, which Sony did with Sony 360, right? I mean, they with the earbuds, and the headphones too, but the earbuds that are, it takes impressions of your ears and it basically shapes the 360 array to the shape of your pinna, right? So, like I see sort of that in the horizon, maybe not as far as like, taking ear impressions and all that stuff, but selling mini speakers, like good looking, beautifully designed mini speakers for you to place in your, in your listening room or living room, whatever. I definitely see that could probably be a thing, and they do capture that segment of consumers that like to spend a lot of money on stuff anyway. So with no further ado, we can start with your demo of Atmos.
Perfect. And so people know, and also to make your editing just that much easier, I'm going to record that separately right here and just talk about some key principles using one of my own pieces of music. So it'll be a video, sadly, without you there commenting on it, but that's just because when you introduce audio movers and a Dolby renderer and a large session, that's when you want 3 computers.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, thank you so much for taking your time to have this conversation. By the way, we were chatting before pressing record for like 40 minutes already. But so thank you so much for taking your time this evening, and we'll keep talking, and keep making this a thing, and keep making other people passionate about it. This is what it's all about.
Perfect. Thank you so much. My pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
For more information on the Toronto Audio Engineering Society, go to torontoaes.org. There you will find notifications on our upcoming events, past events, Masters of Audio, and our member showcase. The Toronto AES is brought to you by Solotech, Gear Audio, Sonotechnique, Bell Media, YSL Pro, Electrosonics Canada, BRTB, Global USS, Adamson, Lawo, avshop.ca, Q5X, and the executive team of the Toronto Audio Engineering Society.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again, Mariana, for the opportunity to have that discussion, for sharing your ideas, and for facilitating the exploration of some concepts within this ecosystem. of immersive audio, specifically Dolby Atmos. And I'm looking forward to following that up now with some music, because of course that's what this is all about. I'm going to be using for this demo a production of my own. This is a song called Reflections off of an album of mine called New Horizons by the ensemble Justin Gray and Synthesis. If you want to learn more about that music or the people involved, please visit justingray.ca, and there's a page there dedicated to the ensemble. So this album was produced in 2017, and it was produced and released in stereo, but I always conceived it as an immersive audio album. And shortly after the production of this album, I became aware of Dolby Atmos, and then over the next coming years, working towards being able to produce in it, it was always on my mind to come back and spatially remix this album, or upmix. And so what you're looking at here is a Pro Tools session. In this context, I went back actually pre-mix and got all the stems from it from post-editing. I wanted to completely reimagine this album in this space, and not be limited to the production that I had done in stereo, but rather have the opportunity to have it really get built in this format from as much of the ground up as possible. I also pulled some stuff that I didn't use in the stereo, like extra mics, extra channels, room mics, things like that, just to create as much of a spatiality as possible. And in the future, I look forward to recording with this ensemble, and I'm already composing with this in mind. I'll have even more intent during the recording process now that I know about this format, which is what we were discussing in the discussion. So the things I want to talk about and use this as an example for are some pillar concepts. I don't want to say that something's right or wrong. I don't want to say best practices. Instead, I just want these to be things that you think about in the world of Dolby Atmos, or specifically in immersive audio production. The first is gravity. Where's the gravitational pull of the mix? Where do I want to focus? Most of the time, it's right up front, left and right. Thinking of this as like, oh, I've got 12 speakers and they're equal. Well, sure, they're technically equal, except that if someone's looking forward and listening forward, which they often are, then they're not equal, because the shape of our ear is different. We hear what's behind us differently than what we do in front. We hear what's above us differently than what we do otherwise. So unless I'm going to be moving my head around, that has to be taken into consideration. Now, I'm not saying that the gravitational force has to be up front. I'm just saying that you need to specify for yourself where it is. And then it's very important that then that becomes a part of your sort of arc of storytelling. Tonality. Tonality in the Dolby Atmos format, or immersive audio and multi-channel audio, it changes. The rules change because with space comes an opportunity for different tonal presentation. Transient distribution. The more that I move the transients around, the more that I affect the weight and the impact of the groove, or the timing of the piece of music. So being aware of the responsibility to transient distribution is important. Energy distribution, this is movement. We get real excited about, here's the renderer, we get really excited about the objects moving. We have a big responsibility to look at how that affects the energy and how that is affecting the piece. Patience. Don't put it all out there at once. I love the idea of an accordion. I have some productions I've done where I literally come back to LR, just left and right, and then accordion back out, and sort of have that as a wave of experience. Be patient with your production, because it makes those big moments more meaningful. Intent should be at the top of this list. Intent is everything. Just be very specific about what you want to do, and the intentionality is important. Spatial composition or storytelling. Music happens in a linear fashion. Use the space that way. I highly suggest it. And sonic averaging is then, considering, for instance, in this context, we're going to be listening to only the binaural render, only the headphone version. I produced this album. I'm listening to it the most of the time in a 714 array, but I'm using the headphones, specifically, in this case, the LCD4s by Odyssey, to do sonic averaging, and choosing the binaural rendering settings very specifically to try and match the experience as closely as possible to the speaker-based experience. So let's take that. Let's listen to some music. And then, in the short time that we have, just explore a few things that link to each of those concepts. I'll pull up the renderer. Stop there for a second. So quickly, I'm going to go back.
Thank you for attending our event. The Toronto AES unites engineers socially. Within our allied arts, we collate, collect, and disseminate scientific knowledge that furthers all fields of audio engineering. The AES aims to empower people of all ages through participation in a healthy, safe...
Hi, everyone. Thanks again, Mariana, for the gravity standpoint, left and right for authentic. Stop there for a second. So quickly, I'm going to go back to a section, and I just want to play for you the Stereo Master. Now, in this context, the tonality is going to be something that you noticed right away is different. The Stereo Master is a little bit darker, and that's because when I came into this space and I remixed this, I wasn't actually referring to the Stereo Master too often in this process. I wanted to just build it up for what it was, what my current aesthetic values, sort of deemed as the right decisions. And let me just pull up the Pro Tools. Sorry. So I've got the Stereo Master lined up here, and I've got it in a sort of solo mode where I switch between the two. In my professional upmixing, for like label-based or independent artists where they've got a stereo master, I would not change the tonality in this way, typically. And by that I mean it's not appropriate necessarily to go in, especially when a stereo master has already been defined, to make that much change. That being said, I do think it's important that we create content to maximize the potential of Dolby Atmos. In these initial days, I will admit that a lot of my own professional work, I have been matching things, and that's actually a skill that I think I have, especially as a mastering engineer, of being able to really dissect what a master is and try to match that with the stems. And that is an art unto itself, and it's an important one in a commercial context. But especially for your own creative work or work going forward, I encourage us all to become more comfortable in making Atmos and making stereo. Let's find ways to get the best out of the Atmos format. And so tonally speaking, you'll notice that the stereo to Atmos, the stereo is darker. That's because it gets harsh if it's all shoved into left and right all together, where in this context the sounds can breathe, and the binaural render is quite authentic in my experience to reproducing that sense of space and openness. So here's the stereo master. And the Atmos. And the stereo. And the Atmos. So I think that there's a bit of a stark difference there. Again, in a lot of my work, when I'm working with other people's music, I might not find myself applying this much of a difference. But one of the reasons I wanted to use my own is I want to suggest for everybody that we feel confident exploring making the Atmos what it needs to be. When I'm listening to this, I mean, this is my own stereo master. It is clip gained down, currently 5 decibels to be more gain matched because the binaural render is not as loud for a number of reasons, and that's for a different day. I have discussed some of this stuff on my YouTube channel. When I'm listening to the two, personally speaking, even in a binaural context, I know that the binaural render oftentimes is something that people are sort of hot and cold on. I personally would choose the binaural render here. I find that the spatiality of it, the width of it, the clarity, the depth, it suits me. I think that it suits this music even better. And again, I'm critiquing my own stereo master in that context. The Atmos experience and the ability to spatialize can have a profound and very, very positive impact on the music. Now, you may disagree, and that's all good. Let's look at some of the panning, and let's just look at this quickly. So as you can see, because I remix this from the ground up, there are actually some plugins involved, more so than you'd see in a traditional stereo mix for me, for sure. But these are UAD and FabFilter and a couple other choices. Yeah, it's stereo mixing in that regard, except you're using stereo mixing tools because these are stereo stems. That's going to change over time with more multi-channel audio, but there are also plugins that deal with multi-channel audio, so it's all good. It all comes down to our ears. It all comes down to listening and adjusting the tonality based on where something is. It's sort of like the louder something is or the quieter something is, you might EQ it differently. Whether it's in hard left or hard right or center, you might EQ it differently. If it's got lots of reverb, the same thing goes for space. Depending on where it is in the space, you will likely EQ it differently. So that comes to the tonality. From a gravity standpoint, left and right for drums, left and right for bass line, left and right for bass vina, left and right for the main tabla. I mean, I've got quite, some major components gluing this thing, gravitationally to left and right. The fact is that this was produced in stereo, and so left and right is valuable. It's very important, and it also is where I want the listener to look. Again, I'm not saying that that's a right decision. I'm saying that I made the decision that I want the listener to feel like they can look forward, and then that contextualizes the space for them. And I relate everything gravitationally to that concept. And so don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of stereos. Don't be afraid of it at all. Use stereo for what it is. You will notice, I'm going to press play just briefly. I just want you to notice something, and I'll talk about it for a second. Sorry, Pro Tools is having a moment just while I record OBS and Atmos all at the same time. But you saw very quickly that the objects, that right here is the center channel. In this particular mix, I have not used too much discrete mono information in the center channel, and I'll explain why. I love the center channel, and when I can use it and it feels like the right thing to do, I do. But you need to make very strong decisions between a phantom center or a dedicated center. And in my opinion, the stems and the original recorded content is what defines that decision. You will know very quickly whether something feels better as a discrete center object or whether phantom center is more appropriate. And a lot of times with stereo content, more often than not, actually, the phantom center is the decision that I make. But again, use your ears. Then we come to a couple, sort of creative decisions. And this comes to the energy distribution and also the transient distribution. This is where, we can have some fun if it serves the music. I took the bata drums, which are a Cuban set of drums that are used in traditional Afro-Cuban folkloric music. Just a sec, let me change my groups. These three drums are typically the okonkolo, the iya, and the itotele, these three drums, who are played by my brother Derek Gray, who studied Afro-Cuban music in Cuba many times. I decided to take those three drums and actually distribute them behind me. So this is like sort of an interesting decision to say, you know what, I want to move some energy behind me. I want to intentionally move something back there. So check this out. So what I did was I took, these are two-sided drums, by the way. They're played like this. Like that. And so that on its own is fun, but it's a little counterintuitive to the energy, except that it's balanced by drums, bass, and melody being right up front. So I've used these rear speakers, like my left surround, my right surround, my right rear surround, and my left surround and my left rear surround as an opportunity that if I turn my chair around like this, it was as if I was listening to those drums faced backwards. Now that's a creative decision. You can't do that every time. That's where the patience things comes in. Every Atmos mix cannot have every technique. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes things are very stereo-based, sometimes things are extremely spatial. The music has to dictate it. But in this context, I found that I was able to distribute the transients behind me because I balanced them with the main gravitational force up front. And if I take away those drums, and bring them back, you can feel them fill that space. But it's very important tonally, for instance, like that I had to darken them enough that they weren't overpowering my gravitational force. This is where we have to do that what I'm talking about here of energy distribution, transient distribution, being very sensitive to the power of moving something out of your focal point. If you move it away, it can be distracting or it can be uplifting. And we need to be very careful with our variety of production techniques to always serve that musical intent and balance. The more we move something back, we need to make sure that our automation balances that decision. Now, you see something swirling around. You'll notice that in this particular production, there's nothing buzzing around like a bee or doing circles too much. There's one thing going like this. Oh, just a sec. Oh, it's, sorry, it's not it. There we go. This is Ted Quinlan, by the way, guitarist. Now, I want you to just experience the fact that even though that looks like it should be so, this is actually a really subtle move, and I'll explain why. He's playing a pad, and what I've done is I've timed that so that actually, according to the beat and according to what he's played, we're not experiencing this thing going woo, woo, woo. I've taken a stereo contact and actually moved it around. So I just want to throw it out there that, yeah, that's maybe a little ear candy moment, but even that is quite subtle. And this is a format that, this is where I'm talking about like the movement, energy distribution. Look, on this record and in my Atmos content, I'll move things around. When it suits it, when I can do it, when it's a musical decision, count me in. But in this particular song, we're not going to see a single object do some sort of loop-de-loop. It's not a thing because it's not serving the music. I like a lot of static object placement, a lot, because it's already enough to be in a big space. That's already serving the music. I don't need to be distracted by things jumping around me unless it's a cool gesture, unless it's a gesture that brings my attention to something. Great. If it helps the story, if it helps the development, do it. But if it doesn't, don't. And don't feel the necessity to. Just because objects can pan around doesn't mean we should do it. You can pan left and right. You can pan whatever you want in stereo. We're not doing this too often. Yeah, maybe a couple of times we'll use an auto panner. We go back to one of those tools, or we'll do some left to right automation, but it's always a specific move. It's never your drum set or your bass line or your lead vocals unless you're really going for it. And hey, I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm just saying as general practices, don't feel like you have to fly things around all the time. Use the space. Feel comfortable putting something somewhere. And then if you find a gesture that works, fine, go for it. Absolutely. I do it all the time, but only when necessary. And don't feel like everyone has to have it. I think that's where the patience comes in and the intent. Spatial composition and storytelling. Let me find a section here to sort of finish off with the time that I have. I'm going to press play from the beginning of this solo, and we're just going to listen as it depends. Actually, I'll go a little bit later. The soloist is Alam Khan, by the way, is a sarod player. And Alam is a brilliant artist who's from San Francisco. Anyways, as this story develops, you're going to notice that it begins very much stereo and a little wide stereo. I've sort of pulled some string elements a little bit further back, but not even close to the back of the space, and certainly not way up high. And I just want you to see as the thing progresses that the space gets bigger, and that's part of the storytelling aspect. And the last thing I'll put out there, just so that you have context on it, I mean, it's not enough time. I'm trying to be sensitive of the time here. In my mix here, I do have a couple key spatialized tools. I am using, for instance, cinematic reverb. Let's see what I've got here. I've got a hall reverb setting that is being put into a 714. I've got a plate. I've got a drum room that I like on this mix, a hall, and a different plate, like a darker plate, and then 2 instances of slapper, which is a fantastic multi-channel and delay. So I'm using a combination of like the cinematic tools and then the exponential audio ones. And so where you're going to see objects up high, over here. Oh, and sorry about that. I was just explaining this without the screen on. So let me just show you quickly. I've got some specific immersive audio reverb tools here. So I've got those there as sends. And so I am sending stereo content into immersive reverbs. And that definitely helps. And so when we're looking at these points, especially up high, those are actually reverb points, not even necessarily content. So you're going to notice as I play this last example, things are very much in more of a wide stereo formation, maybe coming to my side speakers. You don't have to use all the space all the time, and let it develop. So let's see. Oh, guitar still solo, just a sec. Strings start to appear to the side. Space is getting larger. Space is just getting a little bit bigger. As drums come in the back. So the goal there was just to demonstrate, a solo section that just starts to expand according to the composition, not according to the technology, not according to the potential and the ability that I can, but rather that as the composition expands and asks for space, I give it space. So in terms of hearing this music, if you visit my website, as I mentioned, either justingray.ca for that specific band, but also immersivemastering.com. You can connect with me that way. I'd love to connect and work on some music together, but also check out some of the work that I've done for other people and see when this particular music is available if you'd like to hear more of that example. And just back to, closing it out is define your gravitational center. Be confident where it is and remember where it is, because it is essential to know where the focal point is, because it contextualizes everything. Tonally adjust things based on the space. It's one of the reasons why mastering in this format is so key, is that that's a really specific practice. Transient distribution. Be aware of the impact of moving attack points and rhythmic points around in the space and the impact that they have on the groove. Energy distribution and movement. Move when necessary. Don't move when not necessary. be patient, take your time with the development of something, and that sort of leads to that spatial composition. Like, tell a story with this. It's another storytelling device in the production is space. And so use it that way. And then the sonic averaging is just I think that we have to leave that one in the sense that, again, a bunch of my YouTube content gets a bit more into some of these concepts, the importance and the necessity to be both living in the 714 world, which is something that I'm equipped to do, but also listening in cans and understanding how to balance this in binaural, because it is the medium that the majority of people are listening. So thanks again. I hope you enjoyed, and I look forward to connecting in any way. So reach out and have a great one.
For more information on the Toronto Audio Engineering Society, go to torontoaes.org. There you will find notifications on our upcoming events, past events, Masters of Audio, and our member showcase. The Toronto AES is brought to you by Solotech, Gear Audio, Sonotechnique, Bell Media, YSL Pro, Electrosonics Canada, BRTB, Global USS, Adamson, Lawo, avshop.ca, Q5X, and the executive team of the Toronto Audio Engineering Society.
Okay.
All right, so now we're on with Jeff Wolpert. Jeff, would you like to give a brief description of your career and how you got into immersive audio?
Sure. So let's see. I was a musician. I was a drummer for a number of years, and then I got a bachelor's degree in music. I was playing and stuff like that. And I went into. I was always kind of the tech guy in the band. So then I went into the very new program at McGill University. I started there in the sound recording program and took a master's there. And before I finished my master's, I left. I eventually finished it a couple of years later, but I left, came to Toronto, and started at my first studio, a place called Inception Sound, which still exists. I became a partner there, financed by the fellowship money I had from McGill University because I was playing, and so I didn't really need the money. And then I went to that. We built up that place into two studios. I eventually left there and became the chief engineer of a place called McClear Pathé, which no longer exists, but was one of those wonderful Toronto institutions. It was 5 studios. I had a staff of repair people. At any given time, we'd have 120 working microphones and all that sort of stuff. And if I needed something, I could ask them to build it for me. So that was a lot of fun. And I eventually left there and cut completely freelance. I was actually not, and I was resident there, but I was actually on commission. So like, you know what I mean? I wasn't an employee in a way. And but I left there after about 8 years. It subsequently closed, not because I left, but and I ended up at Phase 1. I had a permanent studio at Phase 1 for a little while, Studio D, which is a small studio I had for a long time. I left there and I opened a place called Desert Fish Studios at Adelaide and Peter Street. And then I stayed there for a number of years, and then it's Desert Fish again. We moved very close to, I'm at Spadina and Richmond, at 401 Richmond is the building that I'm in now. And I have here, that's my career. I have this here. And along the way, I've done a few other things. I got a few Juno Awards. I have kept my hand in education. So not too long after I left McGill, I started visiting there as a visiting professor. That lasted for about 15 years. I had a short stint at Fanshawe College, but the trip to London was killing me. And then I came back here. I not came back, but I never left Toronto. And I got in a conversation with the Dean of Music at the University of Toronto. And wrote them a program which has now been going for about 7 years called it's a Masters of Music in Music Technology and Digital Media. And I am, in fact, the director, and I do teach there. So that I've always kept in. It's kind of been a sideline, kind of been my side hustle. And but just because I think partially because I came from that background, but second of all, I probably just like to hear the sound of my own voice, to be honest. and
Don't we all?
and what a better audience, what a better than a captive audience that has to be there, really. Anyways, but it's been a very entertaining program to be part of, and I do teach there. I teach sound recording. So there's a basic sort of core sound recording thing that everybody has to take. And then I teach 2 electives. And one elective is a kind of a mixing kind of a course. And the other one is an elective in immersive audio, in fact. So that's that.
Oh, wow.
And how I got started in immersive audio, or which we used to call surround sound, was easily over the years, half my work has been in film and television score. So, and because all this technology really comes from film and to television, all the surround technology is a byproduct of the film technology, really, or audio for film, right? And so we started very early with what would have been called Dolby Surround, which is a 4-channel analog system. Basically, do you ever hear about quad?
Yeah, of course I've had.
That's right. So quad lasted for about a week. Till everybody discovered, hey, this is neat, but what a bad delivery this is. And but that really became Dolby Surround, which was the left, center, right with a mono multi-speaker surround, but mono signal that went to surround. That was an analog delivery. And that became Dolby Digital, which was the first 5.1 delivery. And then from there, Dolby Digital EX and a bunch of other things. But basically that progression. So I really started mixing film score in surround, I don't know, more than 20 years ago, really.
Wow.
And then for about the last 4 years, I've been involved in the Atmos thing, mostly just a lot of talk, and then a lot of demoing, and then a lot of discussions with my speaker guys, which is this setup is PMC, and and the last couple of years with Dolby directly, just talking about this and the setups and stuff like that, and trying to get this Dolby music thing happening, because really it's a lot of fun. So that's where I've been. So I mean, I've been making some Atmos music for a little while now, but the only outlets have been, some on Blu-ray, some on like Tidal streaming and stuff like that. Anyways, that's the story. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. That's a wonderful, wow. That's a wonderful story of your involvement with audio.
Yeah, it's been.
I've heard so much about you before, and now I just got confirmed. So one question that is fairly geeky here is, what does your studio setup consist on?
Okay, so well, I mean, I guess really with the pertinence to the relevance to the immersive stuff in particular, because I mean, I have a lot of junk here. But okay, so the setup really is I use 2 computers for immersive audio at the moment. I have a Mac Pro that's running Pro Tools with an HDX card. And then, which is just a single card, so it's really, and then that, I have, the interface I'm using is a Matrix Studio at the moment. And so then I have from the Matrix Studio, I have a Dante connection to the second machine, which runs a Focusrite Dante card in a chassis. It's actually an iMac that's running and that's running the Atmos renderer. So I guess I'm using what's called the mastering suite. I started with the production suite, but the problem I had was power on the Mac Pro that I was using. I didn't have a new Mac Pro, and I've been wanting to buy a new computer, but I'm stymied at the moment because I don't know what to buy, and so I'm waiting for an M1 Mac Pro at this point in time. And because of when I started, that was the new Mac Pro was brand new, just coming out. It was actually before it came out. I wasn't sure what to do, so this system allows me to keep the HDX card in the chain. The problem with the production suite is you lose the HDX capability, right? Because everything is native and within the same machine. It works very well, but you need a much more powerful machine, especially if you're running reverbs. And I'm running a number of immersive reverbs. I became a beta tester for Liquid Sonics, and awesome. I've got everything they have. And well, not just because I'm a beta tester, I also like the stuff. So I have the production versions as well. And I'll run multiple immersive reverbs, and I'm running I have to look at the plugins, but I'm running a number of immersive plugins and positional plugins and things at the same time. And I found that the machine got bogged down pretty fast. So I offload a lot of the processing to HDX where possible. And I'm finding that that really helps my situation. So that's that. The speaker system right now is, I just changed it over. This is now all PMC. So I've been a PMC user for a long time, and I was in discussion with them, and I did this project, and they heard it, and they said, "This sounds great. How did you like mixing on our speakers?" I said, "I didn't." They said, "You really should." So we're here. So what I run, I don't know if you can see it, but I run 3 AML2s. Those are those 1, 2, 3. There's 2 JBLs in between with the green lights on them.
Yeah.
Those haven't been made for a long time. Those were really, really one of the best two-way speakers ever made. Now, you might not be PMC fans, and there's also lots of other good speakers, but that was an exceptional speaker. Unfortunately, they stopped making it, and frightfully expensive, I might add. But I had 2, and they found me another one in England at the plant that they refurbished and sent to me last month to make the LCR. The rest of this is a 914 system. I used to have a 916 system, but I found the rooms pretty small, and the 6 wasn't working for me. It felt too blurry. This way I get more distinction in the top. Like, I mean, it's a little more extreme, but it seems to be more defined. And so the surround speakers are all Result 6s, PMC Result 6s, which is their least expensive speaker, powered speaker at any rate. And then the ceiling is, I think they're called CI45s, which is their ceiling speaker. That runs off a Crown DCI amplifier. Because they're passive. And so that's the 9-1 system. And I also have, you can't really see it back there, but I have a, there's my tape machine, which doesn't get a lot of use either. But there's that black box over there. That's on top of it is an Apple Music, an Apple TV box, and an Amazon Cube. And that runs to my patch bay, and I can actually patch bay to the speaker. So I can actually listen to immersive audio streamed in here. Now I don't, that's like a preamp that has 13 outs on it, so it will do a 13 output immersive system, and that's just so that I can kind of quality check what gets on the air, so to speak, because that's the real problem, is how do you listen to it, right? And I've got a Blu-ray player and stuff there, that sort of stuff. So so yeah, I can listen. So that's the system. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, a lot of I asked this question just to see the variety of how people are approaching working with Atmos. And so far, everybody interviewed in this online event has had 1 computer systems. Right. I've met a few people that have like 2 computer setups, but they're usually multi-room facilities.
Yeah, I think this is partly the stuff that I already had. I already had a couple of different systems around, and so this was just repurposing things. So it's not like the only thing I think I had to buy was a chassis to put, I had to buy that Focusrite card, so and a chassis to put it in because it's running off an iMac. But it really, like even the iMac, and this fairly powerful one, is running at about 28-30% running the Atmos software. So you could see that would suck a lot of power out of your main machine if that's what, if that's what it was. I think if you had a much more powerful Mac Pro, you would be fine. But you still lose the HDX thing, no matter what you do, right? Like that's the problem, is you lose that processing, whenever you go native. So the original systems, the recommendation was there were other reasons to run this, because you could record to the system and so on and so forth. That's now no longer necessary, because you'll just bounce to an ADM file, and that'll be that. But but it still works for me. It's still very efficient, and it's still, the separation, for what it's worth, keeps my older Mac system working very, very well. Like I don't run out of power. But one thing, caveat I should say, this is a 64-channel system. So in order to run it at 128 objects, I'd have to get a second HDX card.
Well, makes sense. Yeah,
which is what I planned to do, except now I just want to get a new computer. So it's time to get a new computer. I just don't know what to buy.
Yeah, I mean, if you're having 128, objects, you would need another computer to be.
That's right. What people tell me of the many projects done now in other places that I know, there's almost never a reason to go over 64 for Dolby Atmos music. Certainly, you can find a way to submix that will work out and stuff like that. But there are some big projects that, of course, if I was doing film mixing, that would be a different story. But because I'm I'm really concerned about the music part of it. So far, so good. I may find a time when it doesn't work out for me.
Excellent. So the next question is, what do you find are the challenges and the advantages of working with immersive content compared to regular stereo?
Yeah. So I just did something fun. I just listened to a project I had done, which is on Apple Music, and it was really fun because when I put it up, I had a normal set of headphones hooked up to my iPhone, and when you do that, and I had the Dolby Atmos setting set to automatic. When it does that, and you have a normal set of headphones and not one of the Apple sets of headphones, because I really don't understand why this happens. There's no need for this. It will play the stereo track. And then, but if you go to the music settings and then go to Dolby Atmos and then say Dolby Atmos always on, it will flip to the Atmos track. So what's really cool about it is that you can hear the stereo first, and while you're rolling, flip to the Atmos track because they're in sync and stuff like that. And that was quite enlightening for the moment. I've done that sort of thing before, and but this particular project really sounded good in immersive. And so I think it's all content based. I think some things. The challenge is, why are you trying to make it immersive? And other things lend themselves very easily to immersive. So my recommendation at the moment is still to mix the stereo first. And the stereo is harder to mix than the Atmos is, to be honest. You have less space to squeeze more things into. Yeah. And it causes a lot more, you need a lot more kind of craftiness to get that to work out. And then once I've done that, then upmixing, as it were, to Atmos. So I have to backtrack a bit. So the project I listened to, I mixed it in stereo first, but 30 years ago. And it was the 30th anniversary version of the project that is now released in Atmos. And we did a remix of it in Atmos. I had digital copies of the original analog tapes. And I did mix it again, but I still had the experience of knowing that I had mixed it once. I had some idea of what was going on, I suppose. So that's one where I didn't really, you know what I mean? I did mix the stereo first just for the 30-year gap, but but most of the time I'm mixing the stereo right away, and then upmixing. That works really, really, really well. The challenge that I'm having is when I get stems from people and they're sending me and asking me to do the Atmos version of their stuff. Yeah. And
then you can only do beds, right? I guess if you have stems, it's like, a stereo stem is like.
Yeah, it depends what's on it depends what's on the stem. So I mean, if possible, I'll send them. I have a document that outlines what kind of stems they should send, and basically I ask them for as many mono tracks as they can give me, and of course the effects as separated as possible, especially if they're reverb effects. And so that's a challenge, both because you might get 8 stems and that's the entire thing that you get, the other challenge is that when I get that, people seem to be less inclined, and I understand why, to being adventurous. And they're more attached to the stereo mix at that point in time. And whatever you do, it becomes a little politically more difficult to convince them that just a slightly larger version of the stereo mix is really not enough to make it worthwhile, kind of a thing. And I think that's part of the problem, is we're going to see a lot of that, especially with back catalog mixing, where the record companies are going to want to spend minimal amounts of money doing it. And they really just want to be able to say it's in Atmos, and more than anything else. So you're going to get a lot of really average Atmos, which is this is flipping to another one of your questions, which is going to make the audience response more muted. Like, people are going to go, it's not that big a deal. Do you know what I mean? So, whereas a remix, if you do it, can be, like, I've had artists that I've done the remix, like I've done an Atmos version of their tunes for, I've had them crying while listening here, not because it was so bad, but and I've had other artists tell me that it's the first time they've ever heard it the way they heard it. Do you know?
That's interesting.
So from that, it can be fascinating that way. But then I know that just what you're going to get reactions when people go, well, it's okay, but I don't know, it's not that big a deal. Do you know what I mean? And that sort of stuff. So that's hard. That's going to be a harder sell. In other words, Atmos, just for Atmos' sake, not such a big deal.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting. It's interesting to see how, because it's pretty new, there's still no conventions in terms of where to place things certain way. in certain ways. I mean, there are, but it's still being built, right? Like at the beginning of stereo, for example, you like people would put an entire drum set on like the left side or right side just because they could,
Kind of that they could, there's a famous, I don't know if it's apocryphal or if it's really true, but there's a famous story about, people like, I know now people say, hey, Gio, I really want to mix it like those Beatles records with the drums on the right and the vocals on the left, that the Beatles weren't there for any of that stuff. And it was just the guys at Abbey Road with this newfangled stereo thing saying, well, we got a left, a center, and a right. So the drums go left, the vocals go right, and that's it. End of story. Okay, we're done for the day. Thanks. I don't think it was such, really quite so intentional, if you know what I mean. That we're sort of imitating the lowest common denominator there. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. It's a funny thing, but yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So it'll be completely fascinating to listen to music conceived for Atmos as opposed to adapted to Atmos. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that speaks to that already speaks to the setup. So in other words, if you want to recreate a live situation, well, you can kind of figure out how that's going to work. Do you know what I mean? And if there's picture, it's easier to understand what to do. There's sort of a visual driving what's going on and all that stuff. But but you are right that I did another record with this girl, Lara Solnicki. This woman, Lara Solnicki, this person, Lara Solnicki. And we did an Atmos version of the mix. And it's really tone poem-y poetry set to a lot of improvisation and stuff. There really were no rules, to be honest on that one. And that's a fascinating record because we just kind of went with where the poetry took us, and it's kind of fun to listen to that way.
Oh, is it out already? Is it something?
It is, yes.
Check it out? Excellent.
It is, yeah. The artist's name is Lara Solnicki. The Atmos version is currently not on Apple Music because there's some issues with getting things on Apple Music. So we have it up on Tidal and we have it up on Amazon HD in Atmos. But in order to get it up on Apple, they'll have to take down the stereo. Because on Apple, you have to submit both at the same time. And
interesting.
As opposed to the other ones where you can actually do them one at a time. But the Amazon HD is a little tricky, but you can do it. But to get there's a problem with kind of ownership of the material and getting it onto Apple, because if there was a record company involved on the stereo version and you want to put the Atmos version, you have to,
what a mess.
you have to do it with them, and it gets very, very difficult because you cannot separate out the earnings from the Atmos version versus the stereo version, which means how do you cut the deal? It's almost impossible. So I don't know. It works great if you're completely independent or if you're a completely record company, but if you try to cross the line, you're in trouble.
Well, that's very interesting. That's a subject nobody brought up in any of these short interviews. And it's certainly something to think about, right? It's pretty integral especially because a lot of these are remixes for Atmos, right? So what if the artist doesn't own the masters anymore? If the artist split up that contract with that record company and they're with another record company, right? I mean, it's so messy business-wise.
It is going to be messy. The like I said, and so we've been using Avid Play and other services to get things up, and we've been I did another record with the Art of Time ensemble. The Atmos is up on Tidal and Amazon, but we have the same trouble getting it up on Apple. So we're trying to work that out now. And I don't really know the resolution because when you upload the stuff and you designate the income, such as it is from these things, you're fine until you get to Apple, and then you cannot split it up anymore. So if there was a distribution company or somebody involved, you're exactly in that position where you go, okay, I can give them the Atmos for nothing. Do you know what I mean? Just to get it up there or something like that? Or do I now have to negotiate with the artist to take a share of their fee on the total because we can't say what was the stereo? Because these would be deals where perhaps I'm involved, so maybe I did the Atmos on my own or something like that. Which brings us to the other side of the issue: is who's paying and why. Yeah. And that's it. And I had this discussion yesterday. I was at a bigger studio in town doing a session yesterday, and I know the manager there. We were having a chat, and we're all sort of wondering the same issue about the commerce, which is, it's great that I love the fact that Apple put it up there, and now they forced Amazon, and Amazon's now including it, and we'll soon see it on Spotify and all these sort of places, but nobody's paying any extra for it. So if you're the artist, you're saying, hey, so we can not guarantee you any income from doing the Atmos version. So could you please pay to have it done? That doesn't make any sense. And so I understand the artist's reticence at saying, you want to charge me what for, like, will I get any more plays than I would on the stereo version? I can't say. Right?
Yeah.
So it's nice that Universal is now including in their deliverables an Atmos version from every allegedly for everything that's done for them, at least in the States. But their game is a little more, like they've built 15 studios worldwide to make sounds, and they're charging the artists for it as part of the recoupable expense. So, right, and by the way, they're charging them somewhat more than it cost them. It's not without a profit, which you can't blame them for. That makes perfect sense. And but that's kind of one of those cyclical businesses. Do you know what I mean? Like you charge the artist more, and should there be money, you'll make more money. And in the meantime, you charge them more, but it didn't cost you quite that much to do it, so your costs are down and stuff like that. Like, it's smart business. I understand it. So that's something that they can do. But on the outside of that ecosystem, it's getting look. Even Sony is now requiring an Atmos mix from new artists. So again, I don't know what the story is in Canada. I only know the story in the States. And Sony owns Sony 360. Right? So,
exactly.
And yet they're requiring an Atmos mix at this point.
That's so ironic, and it's very interesting with the Sony 360 stuff, because I don't know how aware you are of how it works. I dabbled on it for a bit, and it's very complicated to get into, and even more complicated to upload something you did for an artist. You pretty much need to be signed by Sony.
I think they wanted to own the process. Well, they're Sony. I mean, that's it. So anyway, I don't begrudge any of the businesses their commerce. I think it's good.
Exactly,
and we wouldn't be here if that wasn't the case. However, I don't really see yet. I see it's also because it speaks to delivery. How are people going to listen? I have noticed that because the headphone delivery is not as much fun as the speaker delivery is. Let's face it. And but I have noticed that the more you listen, it seems to me, this is just an observation at this point, the more you listen, the better it gets on headphones. The more you kind of get used to what you're hearing. And then when you hear the stereo, it feels disappointing. The initial impression may not be quite the same. The initial impression might be, the stereo is kind of better or something like that. But then as you listen to the immersive, it's kind of hard to go back. And we do understand that Apple's intention is their entire ecosystem will be spatial. So we're talking about there's already almost everything they make on Apple TV is already delivered in Atmos. You can see it with the Logic Pro announcement, right? So the same thing is going to happen to Atmos that happened to everything and to all of us, which is it's going to move into people's home studios. They're going to mix on headphones, and they're going to be able to deliver Atmos just without us, which is perfectly fine because that's the way it goes anyways. But I think that all of that just speaks to Apple's intention that all their audio will be spatial at one point in time, which means that hopefully they'll improve their headphone rendering and stuff like that.
Exactly.
As far as I can tell, they're about 4 years behind Dolby when it comes to the headphone rendering thing. Because they cut off the binaural data at this point in time.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a simplified version. It has like less layers of metadata.
It actually has it's like the early versions of the Atmos renderer. They did have the 3 thing, but they didn't work very well. It's a bit like that. Yeah, it's kind of like Dolby was when they started with the software kind of a thing. And I don't understand why it's like that. I haven't got a clue. But
it may be related to, I don't know. This is my theory. May be related to the chips in the phones. Maybe.
You know what? I don't think
able
so.
to do that?
I think it's just so. I think it's related to that they don't want to pay. They don't want to pay Dolby. That's what I think.
Could be.
Yeah, that it's a licensing issue, and they don't want to have to pay them forever. So they're going to do. They're damned if they're just going to do it with themselves. You know, what I mean? And they just haven't figured out how to do it yet.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's interesting because in Sony 360 is kind of similar in the sense that in some, for example, in Tidal and in Amazon HD, it allows for more levels. They call it levels. Right. Levels are kind of like the groupings of speakers, so to speak. The more 3D the experience is, the more levels there are, right? And if for Tidal, it's up to 3, which is the highest level, which is pretty much like 22 objects that you're hearing in space. Right. But then, but then for like Deezer, it's actually level 1 only, which is kind of
Yeah.
simplified.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it also could, I don't know why that would. It's because it's kind of built into the bit stream, right? So whatever. Anyways, So go on. Sorry, I kind of went. I think I went through about three different questions there.
No, that's excellent. Just let it flow. That brings me to our final question: is where do you see the future of immersive audio going, like on the consumer end and also on the industry level?
Well, I don't know, but I can tell you. So I listen. For what music I listen to, it's kind of like I don't really. I feel bad sometimes. I don't listen to as much music as I used to. Obviously the headphone situation is going to be the most pervasive method of delivery, and I think that the headphone situation will improve. Now, I will say this: I did have an HRTF done remotely of my head, and it didn't seem to work for me, to be honest. But I have heard from people who've had it done, like in labs and stuff like that, that it's awesome, that it really does sound good. And we did early on hear about headphones that would, with an app on the phone and the headphones, would do some sort of scan and customize the HRTF. So it's such that what you were playing back through those sets of headphones that were customized by the app software would in fact improve the immersive experience and the location, right? See these guys, this is a head tracker. Even just if you, I'm not plugging for them, but even just Waves NX with the two measurements you take of your head, which is the interaural arc from the back from one ear to the other and the circumference of the head, really does improve the situation. It really does make it better. Now, they don't have an Atmos version of it yet, and Waves is way behind, but they do have an ambisonic thing that you can do. And it still doesn't work so great up and down, but the circular works way better with those two measurements. And the in front kind of sort of gets there. So I think that we will see an improvement in the headphone delivery, which will be good for us. And right now, at home, I listen to the stuff with a soundbar. So I have a soundbar that's nothing special. It's an LG soundbar to go with my LG TV. And it sits under the TV, and I've got two rear speakers, which are wireless, and a sub. And it sounds pretty awesome, I have to say. It's surprising how good it sounds as far as I'm concerned. And it's more that it really does get the kind of immersive thing happening. It definitely gets the surround happening and the bouncing the sound off the ceiling and stuff like that. It's not terribly accurate, but you do feel enveloped. There's no doubt about it. So the sense of envelopment is very good. So those both speak well for the delivery of sound that way. People, when they sit and listen to music, will sit in front of their TV. And if they're not, they're going to listen on headphones. To speak to the kind of Bluetooth one speaker in a room technology, well, that's not going to really, the sort of Sonos idea of one speaker per room as you walk around. People think that's stereo already. So there, you know what I mean? Even though it's off a mono speaker, essentially. So that's obviously not going to make that much of a difference, although the Sonos soundbar is Atmos enabled, right? So that's the thing. So I think that those things are all going to be good for the delivery. I think that anything that gives the artist or the record company some sort of edge that says their stuff, I think that's what we're seeing now. That's why we're seeing that on the Apple Music, and that's why we saw Amazon get on board and all that sort of stuff like that. We'll keep it moving forward. But and we're in that transition period where people are going to say, well, I don't see the commerce. I don't see why I do it. It's not worth doing it, and that sort of stuff. That's the difficulty that we're having now. So I think we need to get over that. We either need to get people to pay for it, or worse, it's going to become standard delivery. You know what I mean? So, well, look, that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, in the sense that people getting into making music are just going to start with Dolby Atmos to some extent. You know what I mean? It's kind of like we don't mix a lot of mono anymore. And I mean, I still check. I have a mono speaker, although not my Atmos mixes, because I don't have something that'll squish it down to mono. But I suppose I do, right? I could squish it to stereo and then just go to mono. I could do that. I haven't really. So I wonder if that's the case. If we'll see spatial audio of one kind or another just become the starting point, or something like that, for the tech. But so I don't have an answer for you. I really don't. I think that the headphone situation will improve, and therefore it may be worth doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like more people will hear what we're doing. All I can say now is I'm kind of doing it because I want to. I rebuilt this room around an Atmos system. I used to face that way, and now I'm facing this way. And so I redid this room around that towards the beginning of the pandemic. And I've mostly been able. I mean, there are other people who are doing more stuff, who are doing like back catalog and stuff like that. I'm doing some of that, but mostly what I'm doing is with the people I'm working with now, and I'm saying, hey, you know what? We should really do an Atmos version of this. Do you know what I mean? And kind of moving it forward and just evangelizing and moving forward with the whole thing. I'm sure there are other people who are busier doing back catalog and stuff like that. But it actually is kind of moving forward. Like, it's not that hard to convince people. That's one thing the Apple release and all that sort of stuff did, which is to say it's not hard to convince them. It's hard to charge them what it's worth.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the issue.
Exactly.
So you have to be in a position where you're either not charging, and you don't want to devalue what you do, which is really a problem. So I am doing it. Sometimes I'm just doing it on my own. Sometimes I'm doing it for a share. Sometimes I'm doing it because there's money and stuff like that. But it depends on what the situation is and things like that. I think other people probably have more luck getting paid for it than I. But I have a point at which I don't like to go below, and if I go below it, if I do it, I'm doing it just because I want to.
Yeah,
and
I know exactly. What you mean.
I think it is one of the benefits of having your own place. So this isn't a home studio. So but it's my own place. You're all welcome to come and use it, and that's good. But I'm not really in the studio business, if you know what I mean. Like I'm mostly in the me business, and and so if I want to do something and I'm not, and I don't need the money, I'll just do it anyways, because I can. And that's what I will say has kept. It's 35 years in, and I'm still excited to do it. So I think that was necessary. I think if I was doing it for the money, I would have been bored a long time ago. So
yeah, absolutely. I was idealizing with when I was having a conversation with Justin Gray. Yeah. I was talking about the Atmos room in New York. Have you ever been there?
In where?
The Dolby Atmos room in Soho in New York.
Oh, it's like no! I haven't been there. I have been to I have been to PMC's room in LA. So I have been to that. That's it. But that's right. Dolby, they have that's right. Yeah.
And I think that exactly what you said, like the cost of entry, the cost of building an Atmos studio to do Atmos properly is so high, yet the industry barely has money to even pay for stereo as we speak, right? And then this extra thing of providing content in Atmos as well on top of that, it kind of doesn't make that much sense financially. But here's an idea that I was idealizing, and I wonder if Dolby thought about it. Why not build several of those rooms in like different cities? The same concept where each week or month there's a theme or a different artist is featured, and if you go there, it's there are projections, and it's like an audiovisual experience. It's not only like a studio with speakers and you go in and sit. No, it's like there's even like a coffee shop and all that stuff. So it's an awesome experience. So I wonder if they're not thinking about doing those in different cities and monetizing it, like you pay to get in.
I mean, essentially they're making a theater is what it's essentially a theater, right? And I've heard my stuff at Deluxe in their Atmos theater, and it's really fun. It's super fun because it's like 64 speakers and, and the Atmos just blows up that way. Sure. I mean, they are, Dolby's a pretty good company. I mean, they are kind of, they are, pretty much the real deal, and they want to do stuff right and all that stuff. And they're pretty helpful. Sure. I will say, one other thing I want to say is that, so at the U of T, we built a new facility there, which is built in the same space the original electronic music studio was. And the electronic music studio at the U of T is actually it was the second in North America after Princeton, and it has a long history of there's all these correspondence with Bob Moog when he was building his stuff, vetting the stuff and sending it up there and stuff like that. So it's kind of a venerable old place. So we rebuilt it because it was hard to be in, like oxygen-wise and stuff like that. It's 3 floors below ground, and in the one of what we call the control lab, because everything is called a lab, but there we have an Atmos system, and part of what we're doing is we also, for people who are interested, we use spatial audio, but we also use it for wherever else it's used, which is video games attached to picture in other places, and for installation, for like art installation and audio art installation and all that sort of stuff. So we have an immersive environment, and that's what we're seeing as well, right? We're seeing other uses of immersive environment and that sort of stuff. So I think we are a little mono-thematic when we think about Dolby Atmos music and stuff like that. That maybe that's not the only use of the thing. And just remember, every person who plays video games who has a gaming console has at their disposal something with an HDMI output, which could easily go to a sound bar and so on and so forth. And
exactly.
So I think, I think that the end user's technology will drive the market. And the fact that there's 1 billion Apple devices out there that will play back the spatial audio will make it the norm. So to some extent, and will drive that market. Whether or not the commerce of it works out in addition to stereo, you're right. But maybe, and this is an awfully strange idea to have, maybe we'll just bypass the stereo.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Maybe the delivery will in fact be Atmos. And instead, the cost of entry to making a studio, when I started, you needed $1 million to build a studio, right? And now you need, a credit card with a limit of $3,000 and buy yourself a laptop, and you, in theory, have way more technology than what I started with, and then that sort of. So maybe, maybe that's where it's going. And what you see with Logic, including the Atmos, who can't do it now? Do you know what I mean? It's gonna have to be in Pro Tools,
and it's very easy to use. I've been looking at it. I was checking it out yesterday actually, and it's like it's fairly integrated. When you think about it, it's and easy to understand for somebody that's not as technical. That's not an engineer. Essentially, it's way easier to understand than the whole thing with Pro Tools. It takes a bit more engineering knowledge to use the Pro Tools one.
Yeah, sure. I mean, ultimately, you just have a panner and an output, and then you're done. I mean, that's all you really need. So I don't know. Maybe that'll happen. I don't know if that's good or bad, but maybe it'll happen. And then maybe what we'll be listening to in stereo is the stereo output, which is essentially the down mix of Atmos, which would be a little more honest in the sense that we'd all be listening to the same thing rather than a stereo version and an Atmos version. But it will change. It's interesting to see because it will change technique. Because let's face it, if you have all these speakers and all this level available, because that's the thing, it goes frightfully loud, right? The system now, right? And I've got 14 speakers in here, all of them calibrated really freaking loud when you get right down to it, And I have to say, it seems a little easier to mix in Atmos when I start something from scratch in Atmos. Now, I have more possibilities, so there's more experimentation going on. But I think the idea that, if I can't hear something, I can just put it somewhere where it's not as crowded is different than me having to make it poke through. So I think if that was the case and I started with the Atmos, I'd be doing a lot more listening to what I'm doing in stereo. And then, do you know what I mean? And maybe that's the technique that's going to happen, right? Which is listening to the stereo, listening to the 5.1, listening to the 7, and then kind of deciding. It's going to change the work pattern a little bit, but why not?
Yeah, that's an interesting way of thinking about it. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens. I've always been interested in immersive. I come from a background of I majored in electroacoustics.
Yeah.
So I've been working in surround for a long time, and also I've done some work for video games, so I've done immersive from that perspective.
Yeah.
So I'm finally, other people are catching on to this that I've been into for a really long time.
It's an interesting idea because when you think about it, one of the things that the hi-fi guys like, of course, they like high sample rate and so on and so forth. And working at 96K in Atmos is still a bit of a pain. You absolutely can. Boy, then you're going to really need a more powerful machine. But the one of the things is the fidelity issue when you're listening to the down mix and stuff like that. It doesn't quite feel like I'm listening to the straight stereo at 96K or 192 or something like that. So I suppose that might be a bit of a loss. But, there's no reason why Atmos can't work at 96K. It does already. We just can't really deliver at 96K, which is the problem, right, at the moment. So but it does work that way, and there's going to be no shortage of computer power. So I don't think that's going to what may be an issue for me at the moment. Certainly won't be an issue at some point. So I don't think fidelity will be an issue. Anyways, I'm interested to see. I've never done that yet, which is except on this remix thing where I started in Atmos, but then I did have a stereo reference, right? And by the way, the Atmos it's the same music, but it sounds vastly different than the original stereo does. Partly just because of the fashions have changed, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And that sort of, I think that's more the 30-year gap than the technology, I think, than the delivery technology, but it's sort of interesting to see. So yeah, it's fascinating. It's super fun to mix in this environment. And it's tweaky, it's nerdy, it gets all that stuff going that if you like that kind of a thing, but it's super fun to just kind of try to forget that and just figure out what works. And that sort of stuff. And there's a lot of cool tech. I've been using a lot of I tried to use the whole AirCam Flux. What's that thing called? Their immersive environments and stuff like that. Yeah. And that has some issues when working with Pro Tools. There's some delay problems, but but that worked well. And there's the other one. Who are those guys? Who's that plugin company? Hang on a second. I'll tell you in a second. That does the. There's another company out of Germany that does a whole bunch of immersive stuff they have a funny name. I can't remember that now. And using all these reverbs and stuff like that and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work and surprising people and stuff like that. It's super fun. It's definitely got my interest up. So I'm very happy about it from that point of view. So, okay.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for taking
You're going to have to edit this down a lot.
Yeah, or maybe keeping it. I don't know.
And, okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful evening.
Yeah, you too. It was very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Yeah.
And I hope we can get back to live events soon because I kind of miss the interaction.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This was initially actually the idea, because I proposed this meeting topic like 5 months ago or something, right?
Yeah.
And at the time, we were all thinking that we'll be, going to conferences by now. Yeah. So then in the end, we were like, no, it has to be still online. And that was kind of a bummer because the whole idea was actually to make it in a space and have people come in and talk. And the whole thing was for the event to be actually present in a I mean,
I'd be happy to do one here. It's not that big, but I could fit a number of people, but not under these circumstances. That's the truth. Yeah, that's.
But we'll see if there's interest in this, and it will be on YouTube. We'll cut it into tinier parts, and people can just go on certain points of the whole thing. If there's interest, then we may actually make an in-person one next year.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I'm not pitching for this, but the project is this Lorena McKenna project, The Visit. That's the 30th anniversary thing. If people want to try it, do what I said. It's really fun to listen to the stereo and then listen to the immersive, right? Which actually I think you can do with anything that's in spatial audio on Apple. And you just have to trick the system by turning it on. Like, don't use Apple headphones. Like, don't use iPod Pros or Beats headphones. And then it'll turn it off when you go to automatic, And that's what makes it kind of interesting because you can hear the contrast. I find that to be kind of fascinating. And it's much different than listening to the down-mixed stereo. Do you know what I mean? Depends on how they did it. But in this case, there's a 30-year gap between the mixes. So it's quite interesting to hear what
Excellent. Yeah. Well, we'll check it out. Thank you so much once again. And have a good night. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you for attending our event. The Toronto AES unites engineers socially. Within our allied arts, we collate, collect, and disseminate scientific knowledge that furthers all fields of audio engineering. The AES aims to empower people of all ages through participation in a healthy, safe, open community presentation. Learn audio engineering through events, presentations, networking, and mentorship. For more information, go to torontoaes.org. There you'll find over 30 years of meetings, events, Masters of Audio, members showcases, and much more. Our sponsors are the Solotech, Gear Audio, Sono Technique, Bell Media, YSL Pro, Electrosonics Canada, BRTB, Global USS, Adamson, Lawo, avshop.ca, and Q5X. Give the gift of membership. Go to aes.org/join to join today.